Chapter 1827. It had to be said that the wolf god's all-out attack was quite ferocious. At least in the first round, Lager could not keep up with Goldring's speed at all. Whoosh! 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 Dozens of claw shadows tore through the air and quickly streaked across the void, imprinting themselves on Lager's huge body and causing him considerable damage. Ragnaros was not an earth elemental giant, and he did not have a body that could knock the teeth out of dragons. Other than the few metal armor on his body, Lager was dressed like a berserker. If he changed to a shield and changed his hammer to a spear, he would look like a Spartan with 300 red underpants. In a rage, Lager swung his hammer at Goldring. Unfortunately, the difference in size and speed made Lager look like a human lord trying to deal with a white mouse that had crawled all over his body. The waist between Lager's breastplate and belt was as big as a racecourse for Goldring. If Lager had focused all his attention on Goldring, the Bear brothers would have already arrived. Oh, ha! 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 Two pairs of bear paws flew up and down, each of them able to hit a large patch of lava from Lager's waist. When Lager tried to send these two huge opponents flying with a sweep, it was tortoise god Totora's turn to face his hammer. When he released a large-scale fire spell, it was Duque and Iwina's long-range attacks. Iwina's attack power was limited, and could only be considered a nuisance at most. Duque, the thief who had stolen the origin of fire, was the one who was aggressive. Just think about it, even Cenarius had started casting frost spells. How could Duque, the demigod of the weave, not attack? A terrifying icicle large enough to make Orgrimmar the main beam of the great hall of the great chieftain appeared out of thin air and stabbed straight at Lager. The 15-meter-long icicle was sharp at the front and thick at the back. It was a fatal nail. Lager could imagine that if he was stabbed by this icicle, he would be in big trouble. The icicle contained terrifying frost elements, and he felt as if Duque had forcefully compressed an entire iceberg into this icicle. Meteor. He could no longer care about anything else. A huge fiery meteor suddenly solidified in midair. With extreme precision, it struck Duque's icicle from above. A victorious smile appeared on Duque's face. I'm not afraid that you won't fight back, I'm only afraid that you won't accept my challenge. To condense a fireball, one needed to inject willpower. Duque was such a scoundrel. As soon as Lager put his will in, Duque's willpower would follow. The two wills launched a fierce attack in the air in a way that mortals couldn't see. One side was furious. One side was a grindstone made of flesh and blood. It spun continuously like a tornado, grinding away at Lager's willpower. Lager was a veteran demigod and the only master of the fire elemental realm for tens of thousands of years. His strength was unquestionable. Unfortunately, as the saying goes, 2 fists are no match for 4 hands. The icicles that Duque threw at him were enough to keep Ragnaros busy. Not to mention the demigod fire demon hunter who was trying his best to please his new master, 6 gods of the wilderness, and more than half of the mortal hero group. Countless injuries were left on Ragnaros' burly and huge body. For a moment, he wished that his body was covered in armor. Then, he wouldn't have to suffer so many physical injuries for no reason. Right now, he was like a water bag riddled with holes. Magma was gushing out from almost every corner of his body. In the past, the magma was just a part of his body that he constantly replaced. Now, it was his life force that would never return. Duque, Marcus, Ragnaros let out the loudest roar since the start of the battle. He raised his Savras, warhammer high and bent his body backward. He didn't even notice that the middle finger of his naturally extended left hand was bitten off by Goldring. Lager was going all out. Right at this moment, the space that was filled with red and yellow was dyed with a more dazzling golden line. Duque disappeared. A mage's most common spell was Flash. 499. 99% of the mages in the world, Flash was only a spell used for escaping. Even after Duque transmigrated, it had been like this for a long time. This time, it was a little different. Between the afterimage that he left at the place where he used Flash and the figure that appeared in the air behind Lager after he flashed, there was a thin golden line connecting the afterimage and the body. Only the top demigods who paid the most attention to the overall situation would notice that there was a hole in Lager's seemingly thick and hard black metal breastplate, a hole that could allow a human to pass through. Through this hole, the thin golden line continued to extend backward. It pierced through the northern wall of Sapron Fortress outside the huge lava lake and even the spatial barrier of the Land of Fire. At this moment, on Duque's Song of Light and Shadow, there was a fist-sized crimson bead. It wasn't quite right to call it a bead, because those with sharp eyes, such as the crow goddess Avina, were surprised to see that the bead was contracting and expanding like a human heart. It was pulsating. It was similar to the beating of a heart. If one was observant enough, they would notice that as the bead was pierced, its pulsation became slower and slower, and the pulsation became smaller and smaller. This is... Cenarius couldn't believe his eyes. Ragnaros, whose chest had been pierced, finally showed a second expression other than anger. It was a look of horror and fear. Lager let out a scream that didn't match his usual deep voice. No, a very strange scene happened. He thought that as the king of fire demons and the ruler of the Land of Fire, Ragnaros' death would be grand and heroic. Even if it was *T. It should be a big explosion. A mushroom cloud or something. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. When Duque stabbed Ragnaros with his sword and took away the last 1% of his HP, Lager's death only melted like a candle under high temperature. The 10-story tall body turned into the most common form of lava in the Land of Fire. It began to melt and flow in all directions, flowing back into the lava lake through the holes on the platform. His pauldrons, breastplates, and bracers, which weighed at least 100 tons, all slid down along the melting body and finally fell off the body of the king of fire demons. The earthworm-shaped runes on the equipment that were once shining dimmed. If it weren't for the huge equipment that still retained the appearance of the Titans, one would even think that they were natural scrap metal and not the equipment of the once glorious king of fire demons. Chapter 1828. To the veterans of the hero team, the veteran team members, this was just another feat worthy of praise by the Great Alliance hero team. At least this time, the bard in the tavern could officially change the killing of Lager's clone from 10 years ago to killing the fire demon king. The wilderness demigods who were working with the hero team for the first time could not help but open their mouths wide. They did not seem to believe that Lager was killed just like that. Looking at the flame bead that was probably the core of Lager's soul on the divine weapon rapier, Cenarius still did not seem to believe it. Ragnaros has been completely destroyed? A ball of flames suddenly spewed out from under the platform, giving everyone a fright. Unexpectedly, the flames that sprang out were as docile as a puppy, supporting Duque's feet with incomparable gentleness. Duque took the opportunity to sit back, and the pillar of flames suddenly transformed in less than a tenth of a second, becoming a pure flame throne. A brand new crown formed by the purest fire elements was crowned on Duque's forehead. Sitting on the brand new flame throne, Duque used his divine will, and the throne made a gorgeous turn on its own. Duque was now facing his companions who had come to challenge Lager, as well as the demigods. Every powerhouse could not help but purse their lips or move their lips, quietly waiting for Duque to speak. Duque tilted his head thoughtfully, because both he and the other existences heard a funny voice. No. You can't destroy me. I am the eternal king of fire. I am the terminator of all things in the world, Duque put Atish back into the space storage bag and used his free left hand to pluck the flame bead that had not completely stopped beating. One could feel the violent wrath of thousands of vengeful spirits gathering on it. It was an irrepentant irritation. It was an eternal roar. Duque's lips curled into a smile. Yes. Very good. As expected, this is the real fire demon king. I'll be very disappointed if you suddenly admit defeat at the very end. Duque looked into the eyes of the two fire demon leaders and saw the desire and fear in their eyes. However, they quickly recognized their situation and bowed their heads deeply to Duque. As traitors, all the fire demons had complicated feelings. On the one hand, they wanted Duque to completely destroy Ragnaros, so that their history of being a traitor would be completely annihilated, and no one would ever come to take revenge on them. Majordomo Executus, who was well aware of the balance of power, knew that if Duque spared Lager's life, it would be a standard imperial study. A traitor. A person who had been betrayed and surrendered. This kind of natural opposition doomed the fire demon's future to be miserable. It was not that Duque had no precedent of forcing a demigod of a foreign race to surrender. Not to mention others, the Kiraji twin emperors were the best example. For a moment, Shaynox wanted to say something to see if he could urge Duque to destroy Lager. Instead, it was Majordomo who grabbed this powerful but not so smart former subordinate. Majordomo shook his head almost imperceptibly. Duque looked at the two fire demon leaders who had lowered their heads, smiled, and crushed the lava core that carried the last of Lager's soul. Ah! No! For a moment, an unprecedentedly violent impact of the soul and divinity directly blasted into Duque's spiritual world. The next moment, the sky and the earth changed color. The lava at the bottom of the platform, the ruins around Saffron Fortress, and even the lava that splashed on the surrounding walls, all dimmed at this moment. It was very obvious that the temperature of the air began to drop. Even without Duque's ice shield, the temperature of the surrounding environment was still unbearably high, but the terrible pressure that could destroy everything at any time was gone. In a broad sense, the Land of Fire was a very vast place. After the Land of Fire overlapped with planet Azeroth, it occupied at least the entire southern foothills of Mount Hyjal. On the defense line close to the north, a large number of low-level and mid-level fire elemental creatures were crazily attacking the defense line formed by Guardian Hyjal, the Night Elves, and the Dalajan Mages. Unlike the casual leveling at the beginning, as the Land of Fire further integrated with the world, the stability of the space brought more mid-level and high-level fire elemental creatures. In fact, the defense line was already tight in many places, and was even broken at one point. It was all thanks to the elite mages and mages sent by the Dalajan mages to retake the position. Suddenly, all the fire elemental creatures stopped attacking. They could not even fight back in the face of the allied army's attack. Not only the fire elemental creatures, but all the soldiers of the allied army who had a certain level of elemental perception felt an inexplicable throbbing in their hearts. Be it the allied army or the fire elemental creatures, they all turned their heads and looked towards the south. In the impression of mortals and fire elemental creatures, the Land of Fire was always a world of jumping and violent activity. There were erupting volcanoes everywhere, and rivers of lava would suddenly appear across the land, attacking other fire elemental creatures. It was a place of intense combat that was countless times more brutal than the law of the jungle. However, what entered their eyes now was a world filled with bright colors, but it was peaceful and still. From an incredibly intense and dynamic scene, it had turned into a world that was almost still. Such an exaggerated transformation was only due to the dissipation of a supreme will. The world of fire elemental creatures became quiet and serene. The entire world of fire seemed to have calmed down, obediently and silently prostrating towards the new Lord of Flames. It was practically the most humble servant. On the Flame Monarch, Duque widened his eyes. Anyone could see that a ball of golden flames was burning in Duque's eyes, growing stronger and stronger. Duque could clearly feel that his will, which had once been difficult to advance in this world, could now soar freely and extend as it pleased. At this moment, all the new mages connected to the weave could feel the laws of fire magic in the entire weave undergoing a huge change. Not long ago, fire magic had always required the most spiritual force out of the three main types of magic. It was like a free wild horse, refusing to be enslaved in any way. Now, powerful fire elemental creatures seemed to be fearful as they lowered their prideful heads towards the mages. Not long ago, due to the conflict between Ragnaros and Duque, every mage had a strict limit on the quantity and quality of fire magic they could use each day. Now, new energy had been injected. The master of this mighty magic network, Duke Marcus, had officially announced that the entire fire elemental plane would be under the control of the weave. From today onwards, fire magic and spiritual force will be sold at half price. Duque announced. Chapter 1829. Whether it was the mages on duty far away in Northrend, the various posts in the Eastern Kingdom, or the mages at the front lines of Mount Hyjal, they all welcomed Duque's policy of having the price of mental strength for fire magic. All along, the destructive power of fire magic had been the undisputed leader among the three elements. But in this life, because Du had led a team to fight against Ragnarok's clone in the molten core and created the magic net, the use of mental strength for fire magic was much higher than in history. Unfortunately, there was a limit to the number of times it could be used. Now that the price of mental strength for a fire spell was halved, the cost-effectiveness of fire magic was far higher than that of ice and arcane magic. It could be imagined that from today onwards, there would be more followers of the Five Fireball Church. This was just the benefit of selling themselves to Pharaoh for the magic net. The greater benefit was at the defensive line of Mount Hyjal. I know that the mages at the front lines have made outstanding contributions and great sacrifices in order to protect the world. As the new master of the Land of Fire, I allow you to contract these fire elemental creatures as you wish, as long as it doesn't exceed your own mental strength. Duque's announcement sent the entire Dalajan into another kind of uproar. The development of magic changed with each passing day. Ever since the battle at the Molten Core, the Dalajan mages led by Duque had greatly strengthened the spell, Summon Water Elemental. The summoned water elemental creatures would improve along with the master's strength. Of course, the main reason was that as the master, the spellcaster had greater control. Another important reason was that Duque had negotiated a mutually beneficial deal with the Haitian water elemental. The Haitian water elemental would summon its people and compatriots to respond to the summons of the magic net mages. So in this life, Pharaoh's water elemental was definitely stronger than the hordes. Everyone knew that Pharaoh could summon water elemental creatures. As long as the summoning was not cancelled, the water elemental creatures would follow the mages around. Let alone attack, they would even be quiet decorations until the mages gave the order to attack. However, mages never had a spell like Summon Fire Elemental. It was awkward just thinking about it. Pharaoh, who was an ice mage, could find a water elemental pet. As long as he paid a small amount of spiritual energy, an ice mage could even let the water elemental pet stay by his bed as a guard while he went to sleep. The water elemental was not annoyed. If you wanted to perform, it would quietly watch you act cool. If you wanted it to beat someone up, it would shoot frost arrows. If you wanted it to be a bodyguard, it would beat up whoever beat you up. The water element was so useful that the majority of fire mages couldn't accept it. Fire mages would eat their own food. This kind of misery could only be experienced by the fire elementalist himself. For a long period of time, be it the Alliance or the Horde, they used ice magic more than fire magic. There was no other reason. The survivability of the ice element was much stronger, and it was very useful. Now that Duque had taken control of the Land of Fire and become the master of the fire elemental realm, the entire world of magic seemed to have been turned upside down. It wasn't that there were no fire mages who wanted to use fire elemental creatures as long-term summons. Those imaginative Dalajan pioneers even tried to enslave the summoned fire elemental creatures by imitating the warlock's method of enslaving demons. The results were terrible. Fire elemental creatures not only consumed more of Pharaoh's spiritual energy, but more importantly, fire elemental creatures were extremely irritable. If they were unhappy, they would rather self-destruct than listen to a mere mortal's orders. It was this characteristic that made enslavement of the fire elemental essence an unstable, semi-forbidden magic that made it so that I would rather perish than let you off. Of course, it wasn't that fire elemental couldn't be summoned. For example, the shamans were very good at this. Through the fire elemental totem, they could summon the fire elemental for a short period of time to help fight monsters. Short-term summons were different from long-term bodyguards. Moreover, in reality, the shaman's ability to summon fire elemental was extremely limited. They would first contact the fire elemental realm with their spiritual energy, then humbly ask for the fire elemental's help through spiritual communication. Under normal circumstances, the fire elemental totem would be effective. But, the fire elemental could ignore you. This meant that the fire elemental totem in this world wasn't very effective in actual combat. Unless it was a radiant moon mage with extremely high spiritual energy, very few people would enslave the fire elemental. Even if there were people who used it, they would mostly use the fire elemental as bombs or walking self-destruct soldiers. Duke's order for the fire elemental to submit to mortals was a completely subversive move. Using their own spiritual energy to attract the fire elemental and condense it into a fire man couldn't possibly have its own will. How could the summoned fire elemental fight? Summoning elemental creatures required constant expenditure of spiritual energy, but conversely, the summoner didn't have to worry about every attack of the elemental creatures. How could one fire elemental compare to two fire elemental creatures? In previous battles, the fire elemental would be at the front while the mages would drink tea at the back. For a moment, the pharaoh at the front line of Mount Hyjal was full of ideas, and all sorts of new tricks were developed almost instantly. Some people contracted 4 fire elemental creatures and really played with 5 fireball gods. Some people contracted more than 10 inferno imps in one go and played with group fire arrows. There were also people who had designs on the molten demon hounds. What the hell, they actually contracted smaller molten demon hounds as mounts. That was so cool that others would die of envy. There was even an ice mage at the Morning Star rank who tried to contract multiple fire elemental creatures. He succeeded, and then summoned a fire elemental and a water elemental at the same time. Unfortunately, before he could truly experience what it felt like to have ice and fire at the same time, the water and fire elemental creatures under him started fighting among themselves. It wasn't a small fight, but a fight to the death. This was amazing. 2 mages had clearly summoned a water elemental and a fire elemental each. Even if they stood at the side, it would be fine. Why did a mage summon 2 elemental creatures of opposite attributes at the same time and start fighting? There were too many things that made the Mount Hyjal defense line a little lively, and even messy. If not for the fact that these alliance mages had fought alongside the Night Elves and defended Mount Hyjal to the death not long ago, the old fogies of the Night Elves would have flown into a rage and chased them all away. Don't King cause trouble in our holy mountain. Duke knew a thing or two about the situation outside. He didn't have time to care. It couldn't be helped. If he killed Ragnaros as an outsider, the fire elemental creatures wouldn't think much of it. Then the fire elemental creatures wouldn't think much of it. Even if Duke and the rest killed all the fire elemental creatures in the entire land of fire, it wouldn't matter. Chapter 1830. The characteristics of the land of flames meant that new fire elemental creatures would be born here at all times. They would follow the instincts of fire creatures and keep fighting, devouring, and growing. Perhaps in a few years, another Lord of Flames named the Great Logger Screw would be born, and he would bring a large force to Mount Hyjal to cause trouble. If that was the case, the Night Elves would not have peace. This time, it was the king's flag at the top of the city wall. As a demigod, Duke overthrew Logger's rule and injected his will into the entire land of flames. The nature was completely different. Duke was the new king of flames. After Duke killed Logger, no one stopped Duke's will from pouring into the entire land of flames. The vast willpower that was as vast as the heaven and earth began to invade the entire land of flames unscrupulously. Duke's will was like the roots of a tree, penetrating, rooting, and sprouting into every crevice in the land of flames and every place with high concentration of elemental energy. After Duke completely controlled everything, the ancient elemental language with a mysterious rhythm echoed in the entire fire elemental realm. I am the weave demigod Duke Marcus of Azeroth, who controls the 3 major elements of fire, frost, and arcane spells. In the battle with your old king, Ragnaros, it ended with my absolute victory. Now, I hereby declare that I am the only master of the land of flames, the supreme ruler of billions of fire elemental creatures. Who agrees? Who objects? Perhaps in the eyes of mortals, Duke had already led outsiders to defeat all the bosses in the land of flames. There shouldn't be anyone stupid enough to come and seek death, right? Don't say it. There really is. Me. I, Pyros, will be the first to disagree. I acknowledge your power, but you're not a fire elemental creature. What right do you have to be our king? A rather powerful will rose from the southeast of Saffron Fortress. His will and his voice immediately received the response of many fire elemental creatures. Oh. Hee. Speaking of which, Duque also felt that he was a bit shameless. After all, he was a human, not a real fire elemental creature. Although Azeroth had accepted him and allowed him to become a demigod that transcended the mortal world, in theory, he had already surpassed the boundaries of human beings. However, racial discrimination was not something that only existed in the human world. It wasn't like people would worship you like a god just because you became a demigod. Look, isn't William also unwilling to call Wolfpapa father? Goldring and William were on the same side. Of course, William couldn't do anything to the wolf god. Duque and this guy who called himself Pyros weren't on the same side. After controlling the land of fire, this world of fire would become Duque's backyard. A huge eye opened above the head of the powerful will. It was a pure flaming eye. It was enormous, mysterious, and carried with it an irresistible pressure. This was the terrifying aura from the new Flame King. Duque could clearly see who the opponent was. Pyros was a lava giant. Hot lava flowed all over his body, but he lacked a rock layer that was hard enough to protect his body. However, the temperature of the fire elements on his body wasn't too high. Most importantly, Duque remembered who he was. He was the son of Lord Leolis, who had just been killed and was commonly known as left and right legs by the players. Duque, who was sitting on the flame throne, had a contemptuous smile on his face. Indeed, a family should be neat and tidy, right? His father's corpse hasn't even turned cold, and it's his son's turn soon. This sentence caused the Alliance powerhouses and demigods who were watching this scene from the huge flame screen to reveal a playful smile. Duque flicked his finger, and a huge flaming tornado appeared above Pyro's head. In less than 3 seconds, this huge flaming tornado compressed a massive amount of fire elements at an extremely high intensity. Under the gaze of all the fire elemental creatures within a radius of several kilometers, it turned into a huge fist. The atmosphere was rioting. All the conscious elemental creatures fled the area in fear. Pyro sensed in shock that the power he was familiar with was leaving him, and an even greater and boundless power from the true master of this world of flames was about to descend. This flaming fist wasn't something a little lava giant leader like him could withstand. He didn't beg for mercy, nor did he resist. He just stared blankly as Duque's uncontrollable power dominated and took over the surrounding space. That's right. Duque was showing off his prowess. And he was the chicken that Duque killed to show the still untamed fire elemental creatures of this world. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the huge flaming fist finally descended. This wasn't a simple physical attack, but an elemental bombardment through and through. A thick pillar of fire that would take 30 people to wrap their arms around connected the ground where Pyros stood with the endless flaming sky. This rather powerful lava giant leader, who should have survived until Return of the Legion, before dying, just like that, his soul and body were reduced to dust in this fiery land. Just like that, Lord Riolis's lineage disappeared from the history of the land of fire forever. More flaming eyes appeared in the sky of the land of flames. They used their sharp gazes to sweep across all the fire elemental creatures on the scorching land. As the flaming eyes blinked, a sharp voice rang in the ears of every fire elemental creature. Who? Who else? Who disobeyed the rule of the new Lord of Flames, Duke Marcus? Is it you? Is it you? Or is it you? As if he was calling names, Duque sent his majesty and will down on the heads of the relatively powerful second-tier leaders. The mother of Nightmare Spider Bestarak was dead, but that didn't mean that the entire Nightmare Spider race was wiped out. Under the mother of Nightmare Spiders, there was actually a group of powerful Nightmare Spider Lords, and the most outstanding among them was Jianghu. When Duque's will descended on her head, her 6 legs almost instinctively turned to jelly. She knelt on the ground on the spot and curled up into a ball. Jianghu, of course, obeys your rule. I am a servant who serves the Supreme Lord of Flames, Duke Marcus. Very good. Duque's voice came from the flaming eyes. As a powerful Nightmare Spider who obeys me, I grant you the title of Nightmare Spider Mother. But there are other powerful nightmare spider lords. Her grievance only lasted for a second. Suddenly, within a few kilometers of her territory, 5 or 6 miserable screams came at the same time. Those were the final cries of the spider mother, who was at the same level as her. Enemies who used to be at the same level as her were instantly turned into ashes. The new Lord of Flames, Duque, was actually so powerful. Chapter 1831. Not daring to struggle or resist at all, the new broodmother kept her curled-up body and offered her humble loyalty to the new master of the Land of Fire in her own way. None of the spiders in this world were trustworthy. Most arachnid creatures had sinister, cunning, and unpredictable characteristics. Duque didn't care, because he wouldn't bother to pay attention to a broodmother who wasn't even a demigod. Since he was the king in the Land of Fire, Majordomo would become the manager of this place again in 10 years. Under one person. Above all others. He was talking about the fire demon supervisor. Moreover, Majordomo used the former broodmother's flame core to become a demigod. How could he be on good terms with this broodmother? Duque didn't say anything and just smiled. He used to think that all the masters in the fire elemental realm had been wiped out. Now he realized that he was taking things for granted. If he didn't control all of the fire elemental realm, he wouldn't have known that Smodron, who was supposed to be one of the 4 elemental lords in the original history, was actually quite powerful at this point in time. He wasn't in the narrow scope of the Land of Fire. Instead, he was near Grey Valley. As a lesser lord, he restrained his subordinates and didn't let too many fire elemental creatures rush into Grey Valley to set it on fire. To the great supreme of fire, Smodron, offer my loyalty. The fire elemental lord who looked like the gatekeeper, Belloc, knelt on one knee before the huge eye of fire. Don't you dislike me because I'm a human? Duque's booming voice came from the eye of fire. In my eyes, fire elemental creatures are no different from other creatures. That's why I've always opposed Ragnarok's plan to destroy the entire world of Azeroth. I lacked the strength to fight against him, so I exiled myself to this remote place. Smodron was speaking the truth. The fire elemental density in his territory was obviously far less than in Logger's lair. Of course, if he had been recruited by Logger earlier, he would have been lying on the ground like the other stubborn fire elemental lords, and even his flame core had been dug out and devoured. Duque was quite satisfied with this guy. Very good. Come to my throne room, and I will grant you your rightful place. A huge door of flames opened in the void. Smodron did not resist and walked in directly. When he came back to his senses, he saw Duque surrounded by a group of fire demons and a group of demigods. Without much to say, he knelt down on one knee and swore his loyalty. The ceremony was completed. In terms of pure strength, Smodron was definitely the strongest among Duque's fire element subordinates. First come, first served. Duque had to give the loyal Majordomo a higher status. For the time being, apart from Duke, Majordomo and Nox were ranked second, and Smodron was third. Majordomo was ranked first in the fire elemental world. In the long run, Duque would consider giving Smodron the second position after he made a contribution. This was a check and balance, as well as a test of strength. But that was a matter for the future. Dominating the Land of Fire and becoming the king of one of the 4 major elemental realms, Duque's value would definitely rise. Considering Duque's characteristics as the pharaoh, it was not hard to imagine that he would definitely attack the Tidehunter's water elemental realm. But right now, everything was unknown. Attacking the Land of Fire was not only to help Mount Hyjal, but also to help the world of Azeroth. Duque could feel the gratitude from the half-asleep will of Azeroth. Since Duque killed Logger and got the biggest benefit, he was too embarrassed to take the rest of the spoils. Duque did not know what was going on with the mortal equipment in Logger's hands. In any case, Logger was dead, so he just dug out a bunch of mortal equipment from Logger's lair like a treasure chest. Kale, that speculated that this might be the equipment of the Titans who imprisoned Logger. No matter what, this batch of equipment was definitely the best batch he had encountered so far. Arethar's Eye of Flames was an epic longbow with a unique design of flames. The huge handguard on the bow also functioned as a gauntlet. Among the disc-shaped patterns on the bow, there was a sun-like core that burned with inextinguishable flames. Tyrant, Chandris, and Lilith naturally accepted such powerful bows. There were 3 of them, and they were of such high quality. A cloth armor, Flame Manager's sash, was originally taken back by Lager after Majordomo Executus' betrayal. Now, it was more like a symbol of power that Duque had given to this fire demon leader. In addition, there were 3 Shulev. Staff of Annihilation. The shape of this staff and the head of the staff looked a bit like the holy light creature Naru. This was because every piece of gold and rose-red metal in the shape of flames was suspended in the air, surrounding the energy gem that shone with a mysterious radiance at the head of the staff. It was not very powerful to call it an energy gem. In standard terms, it was an energy formation that was solidified at the head of the staff. The mysterious energy of destruction was fixed at the head of the staff in a whirlpool-like manner, constantly absorbing the surrounding elemental energy to provide more powerful magic power for the owner of the staff. This standard staff not only provided powerful bonuses in endurance and intelligence, but also had a super high additional bonus in magic circuits. It was no exaggeration to say that the increase in magic power far exceeded the total magic power of a Radiant Moon Mage. Only Breaking Dawn archmages and demigods like Duque could use this staff. There were 3. One was given to Kai, one was kept for Jaina, and Duque took one for himself as a souvenir. Kagwan Balrog King's Warhammer was actually a milk hammer that increased magic power. Because of its powerful comprehensive properties, as well as the increase in spirit and level acceleration, he kept it. When Riadaline returned, he stuffed it into the Blood Elf Knight leader's hands. The bastard Gavin Rad actually had the nerve to imitate Riadaline's speech, pinching his throat and shouting, "Boo-hoo! Are you trying to make me never return on the path of healing?" If Riadaline heard this, she would probably want to cry. It couldn't be helped. These days, the Holy Knight heroes were all triple elemental Holy Knights. Riadaline wasn't the best at fighting, so she was naturally thrown into the role of a healer. The other Holy Knights each had an offensive divine artifact. They couldn't let it go to waste, could they? The group imagined Riadaline, who couldn't complain, especially the Holy Knights, and felt weird. Especially the Hoof who had been playing around with Happy Flames. She touched the back of her head in embarrassment and laughed foolishly. If she hadn't obtained Happy Flames, which was originally Morning Shadow, she would probably have been thrown into the healing team sooner or later. Chapter 1832. Here. Let's give this to Riadaline too. Let's comfort her. Duque took out the 2-handed hammer, Savra's Hand of Burning Annihilation, and prepared to give it to Riadaline. As the war hammer that Lager had used before, this weapon had a rather impressive foundation. Even though the war hammer had shrunk to a size that could be used by humans due to the lack of a massive amount of fire elements, it was a completely different concept in the hands of a true powerhouse. However, William objected. Magni will eventually return. In fact, not only does Muradin not want to use his brother's Balrog hammer, but Magni's spiritual imprint on the hand of the Balrog has not disappeared. Even Bulang, who was assigned to the melee team, lacks a suitable weapon. Duque was speechless. The Alliance's hero team actually lacked defensive warriors these days. There were many professions that could tank the boss: defensive warriors, defensive knights, wild druids, and even the new death knights. However, the people who entered the hero's domain were all unrestrained. Look at that group of bastard paladins, each of them carrying a divine weapon for damage output and whistling at the side. They could attack the monsters, but not tank them. William was a true berserker, and he couldn't possibly just give him a shield and let him tank the monster's aggro, right? What a waste of resources. In the end, the one who tanked the boss was Bronzebeard. Bulang, who was originally a hunter with a flintlock, was forced to go to the melee team because of the overflow of rangers in the Alliance's hero team. Dwarves had very high requirements for weapons and equipment. The top-notch god's descent could increase the size of their equipment, but not their weapons. Hence, the Bronzebeard brothers were troubled by the need for a powerful weapon that could increase its size along with its body. After enduring for so long, the hand of the Balrog was the most suitable weapon. Fortunately, there was an additional, Savra's, hand of burning annihilation. Next, almost all the spellcasters had a voltage transformer pulse capacitor. This thing sounded very scientific, but it wasn't scientific at all. Not only did it give Pharaoh a high increase in intelligence, but it also allowed Pharaoh to accumulate special free energy every time his magic attack was a critical hit, forming an electric charge that could be blasted out randomly. Finally, they attacked the Land of Fire. After wiping out all those who resisted, they left. It was necessary for everyone to have a set of work clothes. The thief, Death Knight, Mage, and Druid all had the Flame Victor set. Paladin, Priest, and Warlock all had Flame Conqueror set. The Warrior, Ranger, and Shaman all had Flame Protection set. It wouldn't be wrong to say that these were work clothes. In the end, these were the standard equipment left behind by the servants of the Titan giants. After killing the boss, it was the perfect time to let these items see the light of day again. Most of the time, it wasn't because of how good the set was. Even if they were all individual pieces, they wouldn't necessarily be much weaker than the set. Keeping the suit was purely a memento of an era. William, for example, had specially opened up a basement in the Storm Fortress to store his used armors. From the Courage and Strength sets in the early Molten Core era, to the Fearless set in the Middle Period, to the King of Emer set in No Scent. In terms of equipment attribute bonuses, these sets were already outdated. William couldn't bear to throw them away. Firstly, these pieces of equipment couldn't be given to anyone after being soul-bound. Secondly, they were proof of his bravery. Even today, he would catch the little Prince Anduin Rin from time to time and let him look at his father's collection. It wasn't to prove how awesome his father was, but to let him learn from the vigor of a warrior. Unfortunately, little Anduin seemed to have gone further and further down the path of filth. In order to prove himself, this kid was already clamoring to join the Alliance of Heroes. He kept saying that Duque had stabbed Sargeras to death at this age. William's face was very dark because of this. The biggest beneficiary of killing the Fire Demon King was Duque. If not for Duque saying that there was no way to move the Land of Fire, Cenarius and the other demigods would be even happier. The fusion of space was not as simple as mortals thought. Since the Land of Fire was attached to the southern foot of Mount Hyjal, it couldn't be separated easily. Cenarius was a little indignant at first, but Isra came out in time to explain that even a true god couldn't separate such a large plane after fusing it. There was really no other way. Duque could only make a sacred oath in front of the guardians of Mount Hyjal. As long as he was still the boss of the Land of Fire, he would restrain the fire elemental creatures and not let them run around. In view of Isra's guarantee for Duque on this matter, Cenarius remained silent, which was rare. Moreover, the current situation didn't allow the naturalists to think too much, because the cataclysm brought about by the elemental invasion was still ongoing. The fire elemental world was settled, but the earth elemental world hadn't arrived yet. At least there was still wind and water. Duque got a group of wilderness gods out, and the Alliance of Heroes was once again in a position to attack at any time. This made the entire alliance heave a sigh of relief. In Theramore, Jaina, who welcomed Duque, pounced on him without any hesitation. Like a playful little girl, she hung on Duque's body like a koala. Duque smiled, hugged her light female body, and spun 1080 degrees on the spot. Duque, I knew you'd always be the best. Jaina was extremely excited. Let me tell you, those barbarians from the tribe haven't taken down the Twilight Fortress yet. Oh. That's normal. Duque didn't care too much. With Brainless Roar in power, the tribe and the alliance were destined to go further and further apart. Duque couldn't wait for Brainless Roar to use up all the vitality of the tribe. From a certain point of view, it was indeed a solution to solve the food shortage problem by sending people to their deaths. Unfortunately, this was a classic case of putting the cart before the horse. A race with too few people could never become the ruler of a vast land. Yes, Duque, do you think the tribe can take down the Twilight Fortress? Jaina asked after a passionate hug. Before Duque could speak, there was a cold snort from the side. Humph. Impossible. No matter how weak my mother is, she's still my mother. Even if she resurrects, she'll definitely be stronger than me. The one who interrupted was naturally Onyxia. She sensed Duque's arrival at Theramore and flew over immediately. Duque curled his lips, feeling that the relationship between the Black Dragon King and his family was really interesting. On this point, Duque agreed. Sinestra is very strong. If it were the current Gurus, even with the Dragon Slayer Groll, they wouldn't be her match. As long as she's here, the tribe can forget about taking down the Twilight Fortress. Duque turned his head and looked west, where the battle was. He smiled and thought to himself, brainless roar, I'll just quietly watch you show off and quietly watch you court death. Chapter 1833. Is there anything we can do now? Onyxia seemed to be eager to try. Basically, we just wait. But since I'm back, you can go to the Dragon's Slumber Temple in my place. Duque gently hooked the Black Dragon's little nose. Is there a fight? The Black Dragon looked up. Are you asking if there are weaklings for you to bully? Alright, there are. Duque smiled. Even the Black Dragon blushed a little. Alright, since it's Master's order, Duque turned his head back. How are things on their side? When Duque attacked the Land of Fire, it wasn't that Duque didn't have time to attend to other things. It was because Uldum and Vasker were very special places. Unless Duque came personally, he couldn't just use the weave to invade them. All of a sudden, the information there was sent back to the most primitive way of sending messengers. In the end, Jaina was in charge of summarizing the information. It's the final battle. Over in Uldum, Torver's Lost City and the Hall of Origins have been settled. Aurelia and Sasha have already brought people to support Savannah's. Brian Bronzebeard was the only one left in charge of the Hall of Origins. Sister Vasker said that she found 2 new demigods and is preparing to recruit them. At the same time, she has already attacked the tidal throne and is fighting against the sea monster sect leader Azamat. Jaina finished her report and added, should we send reinforcements? Duque hesitated for a second, but still shook his head. No, since they chose to be independent, they should show their courage. They chose their own path, and they have to finish it even if they have to kneel. There was something else Duque didn't say. Unless they ask for reinforcements themselves, Duque raised his head and looked into the distance. He was silent for a long time. If they are willing to be the beautiful canaries in the cage, Duke does not mind giving them a crook of an arm to protect them from the storm. But they weren't just his women. They were also great heroes who shouldered the fate of the elves and led them into the future. Perhaps it was because of this persistence that the Windrunner sisters' beauty was so extraordinary and captivating. Jaina asked softly, before the Stonewall continent merges with Azeroth, is there anything else we can do apart from providing disaster relief and restoring production? Duque shook his head. Wait and hope. Duque really didn't interfere. If Queen Syriana couldn't deal with Al-Akir, who was known as AWOL Trash, and Vashti couldn't deal with a sea monster suzerain, then how could he expect them to block the Burning Legion's attacks in his territory again and again in the future? Deep into the night, Duque was still anxious. Through the portal, Duque took out a large stack of reports from the Alliance and started to deal with them in the study room that Jaina had left for him. Every queen has her own bedroom and study in her own palace, or in her own summer palace. This was a form of respect and an honor. Duque accepted it very calmly. Hundreds of mages' eyes were reviewing the reports, and even more mages' hands were flipping through these reports. Just like that, Duque lay comfortably on the armchair behind the desk and let his spirit browse through the massive amount of reports. This wasn't something a human could do. Fortunately, Duque was no longer a mortal. Knock knock. There was a knock on the door. Come in. Even without asking, Duque knew that it was Onyxia at the door just from the soul connection. It was rare that the Black Dragon Princess actually came wearing a high-slit cheongsam tonight. The slit that reached to the waist showed the vacuum state under the cheongsam. A dignified dragon, but walking like a cat. She climbed over gracefully and went under the desk in front of Duque. Well, it was one of the daily dragon taming lessons, dragon spitting pearls. For Duque's convenience, Onyxia even made a pair of interesting black dragon horns on her head, which could be used as handles. There was another knock on the door. Jaina, who came in on her own, glanced at the humanoid black dragon princess under the desk. Without saying anything, she simply came up and waved her finger, and the pile of files was moved away by 2 additional hands of magic. Hey. Duque. I miss you. Faced with his beautiful disciple, Duque put on a serious face. Well, it seems that it's been a while since I discussed the academic problem of the reactions of different individual magic circuits in joint situations with you. Jaina winked. Master, please enlighten me. So, Duque changed from H-Ors to Ors 7. While Duque waited for the progress with his mount in his left hand and a certain queen in his right hand, the Horde's attack on the Twilight Fortress finally came to an end. After all the hardships and the loss of almost 400,000 Horde soldiers, the elites led by Garush finally faced the last leader of the Twilight Fortress, the great traitor Gujar. If Gujar were still a simple 2-headed ogre, Brainless Roar probably could have cut him into pieces on his own. As a boss-level expert who had been greatly strengthened by the ancient god and Zoth, Gujar became a huge problem. Corruption of the ancient god, corruption, acceleration, corruption, plague, corruption, distortion, corruption, absolute. Before him, everybody had to face a cruel test of willpower. The skill, betrayal, tempted every weak-willed warrior to worship Gujar on the spot and raise their battle axes to their companions a moment ago. The corruption of the ancient god, on the other hand, forced him to become a fallen one through all kinds of dark methods. When the corruption reached the 2nd level of plague, he couldn't help but vomit, causing shadow damage to all his companions who were sprayed by the vomit. When the 3rd level of distortion happened, he would automatically cause group shadow arrow damage to his companions around him. Finally, when absolute came, he would become a powerful warrior and increase his attack power by 100%, but it also meant death. When his companions betrayed him for no reason, Garush chose to kill them. When the old orc Eitrig, Thrall's advisor and expert, entered the distortion state, Garush also shouted, "Traitor!" He cut off the head of Eitrig, who was about to leave the team and was about to die by himself. The other chief's eyes were bloodshot. However, in the face of a great enemy, they could only endure the displeasure in their hearts and continue to attack Gujar. After a fierce battle, Garush finally cut off the 2 heads of the traitor ogre. The problem was that he put Gujar's head together with Eitrig's. Ha ha ha. Hang the heads of these 3 traitors on the main gate of Orgrimmar. Garush ordered. Chapter 1834. For some reason, Sinestra, who should have existed in the deepest part of the Twilight Fortress, was no longer there. From this point of view, it could be concluded that the Horde had finally won the war at a heavy price. But Garush's actions had undoubtedly completely ignited the conflict between him and the other chiefs. No. Eitrig is definitely not a traitor. Everyone saw that, it was Guggle's vicious skill. Are you saying that a warrior profession can use shadow arrow? Wajin roared, and he opened his arms fiercely. I didn't ask for your opinion. Trolls. Garush said contemptuously. I agree with Dworkin. Eitrig didn't want to attack us. Drano stood up, his burly figure even more oppressive than Dworkin's slightly thin figure. Garush was not happy. He pointed his left hand at the tip of Drano's nose, almost poking the forgotten leader's nose. Shut up. I don't need a dead man to influence my decision. It was I, Garush Hellscream, who led the Horde to win this war against the traitors. I am the only one who will be the victor of this war. Remember. Dead face. In the Horde, only the winner has the final say. After saying that, he fiercely slapped the strong pectoral muscles on his chest, making loud banging sounds. Sparse cheers could be heard from the surroundings, but even more people were silent. Garush's eye deeply stung everyone present. Not only the tribal chiefs, but even many of the elite beast men who were clustered around the periphery felt that the word was rather harsh. Next to him, Cain, who was covered in blood from the battle just now, strode over regardless of the wounds on his body. The huge totem pole slammed into the ground, making a deafening noise and raising a lot of dust. Garush. What did you say? Are you saying that you are the only winner? Then what about the hundreds of thousands of soldiers sacrificed for this battle? Were those orcs cannon fodder? Were more than half of our Tauren, trolls, and Forsaken warriors just stepping stones for your prestige? The Tauren chief, who was as huge as a hill, stood in front of Garush, looking down at the great chief who was shorter than him. Garush already hated the feeling of having to look up to someone. Unexpectedly, Cain was so angry that he sprayed saliva in Garush's face. Any qualified leader with a bit of political sense would never say something like this. However, the reason why Garush was called the brainless roar by many alliances was because of his 5 IQ and his personality of speaking without thinking when he was angry. Garush's first reaction after being spat on was to punch Cain in the bull's mouth. It was a powerful, swift, and ruthless left hook. Every tribe leader present saw that the old bull's slightly long face had been beaten until it was deformed. Even the muscles on the right side of his face had received a fierce blow to his gums. At least 3 of his teeth had been knocked out. His huge teeth flew out of his mouth along with the stench of blood. The old bull was a bit stunned. Then, words that made him even angrier rang in his ears. It was Garush's terrifying declaration. Pay attention to your identity. Cain. You Taurens are just vassals of us orcs. The tribe will always be decided by the orcs, and I am the great chief of the orcs. I am also the great chief of the tribe. Those who don't listen to the great chief's orders can die. Cain looked up and was shocked to see Garush making a throat-cutting gesture at him with his thick right thumb. Long-term injustice. Long-term suppressed anger. The humiliation he had suffered during this period of time. Everything was like a volcano that had been suppressed to the extreme and had to erupt. It erupted in Cain's heart. If the Taurens were a race that Thrall had conquered in war, perhaps Cain would choose to lower his head. But that wasn't the case. The tribe used an integration system similar to the Alliance. In the tribe's declaration, the status of the various races was equal. Even though the orcs in the tribe were numerous and powerful, allowing the orcs to occupy an absolute ruling position, the tribe's declaration did state that other races could challenge the great chief's ruling authority. At this moment, Cain could no longer care about anything else. The Tauren chief pulled out the flag on his back and threw it in front of Garush. According to the tribe's tradition, I, Cain Bloodhoof, request to challenge you for the position of great chief. Come. If you really think you are the tribe's #1 warrior, then accept my Makra. Garush's face turned green and then red. Suddenly, he roared and stomped on one of Kajar's heads. I've had enough. I've had enough. I've had enough of your complaints. I've had enough of your weakness. Why can't you weaklings obediently listen to the orders of the strong? Don't compare me to that weak fellow Thrall. He has already scrammed. Now, the great chief of the tribe is me, Garush Hellscream. Garush raised his bloody axe high. I accept Cain's challenge. Who else wants to challenge me? Is it you? Is it you? Or is it you? If you want to come, then come at me together. As he spoke, the blade of his axe was first pointed at Cain, then at Wajin, then at Dranos, and finally at the goblin prince Galawex. Wajin was not as impulsive as Cain, but everyone could see that his protruding fangs were trembling with anger. Garush, I don't want to fight with you. When you and Cain's Makra are over, I will make my decision. Wajin clenched his fists tightly. Anyone with a brain knew that unless Garush was completely defeated and Cain replaced him as the new great chief, it would mean that the tribe would split. A week later, at the south gate of Orgrimmar, which was opposite the main gate. It was a huge pit with a diameter of more than a kilometer formed due to the cataclysm. Tens of thousands of tribal warriors formed a huge circle, and at the bottom of the pit were the challengers and the challenged of Makra. Cain was the first to shout, "Garush! I will defeat you. Under your leadership, the tribe will surely be destroyed." Ow, 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 Garush brandished his sharp axe. First, he roared at the sky, showing everyone his amazing lung capacity. The wild and primitive roar even suppressed the sound waves of tens of thousands of people for a moment. Then, the young orcs from Nagrand burst into even more enthusiastic cheers. This was their idol, the strong orc that they dreamed of, the role model. No matter what, the one who could lead them to victory was a great hero. Chapter 1835. Perhaps some people criticized Gurus for sacrificing too many of his compatriots for this war. But in the eyes of the traditional orcs, so what? Those who died were the weak. The weak were not qualified to have glory, power, and land. Gurus. Great hero Gurus. It was an earth-shattering cheer, a wild roar, and the shock of tens of thousands of people worshipping him. Garush raised his arms high. He loved the feeling of standing at the pinnacle of power and glory. He raised his father's single-edged axe, Bloodhowl, and waved it a few times. Although he hated his father, who bowed to the human leader, Duke Marcus, he reluctantly approved of his father's actions. At the same time, he felt that Bloodhowl was indeed useful. Of course, he didn't feel anything about his father using a knockoff version of Bloodhowl that he had gotten from a certain demon prince in Karazhan after someone gave him a family heirloom axe. As for feeling the so-called fatherly love, the brave orcs didn't need fatherly love, at least that was what he thought. Gurus pointed at Cain from afar and shouted, "Cain, I'll give you one last chance. Admit your identity as the weak and kneel in front of me." Bah! Don't even think about it. Under your leadership, the horde will only be destroyed. Cain retorted. In the temporary auditorium near the arena, other than Gruul, who had an indifferent expression, the other chiefs all had nervous expressions. Cain's son, Bane, clenched his fists. As the military commander of the horde, Varrock Salyafar didn't want to see this happen, but he knew that the conflict had been completely intensified and could no longer be resolved through dialogue. Makra might be the only way to resolve the dispute outside of a civil war. With a deep sigh, the white-haired old orc commander raised his right hand high and put it down heavily. "I declare that Cain Bloodhoof's challenge to Gurus Hellscream's Makra begins." The taller and bullier Tauran chief was undoubtedly the strongest MT of the horde. Ever since Sar led the orcs west to the Kalandor continent, Cain had been active at the forefront of the war. Since the famous Battle of Mount Hyjal, his majestic figure had been imprinted in the eyes of every horde powerhouse, and he had never retreated. His bravery and strength were obvious to all. In fact, as soon as the battle began, he completely overwhelmed Garush. Bang! With the exact same fierce charge, the two warrior heroes turned into a stream of light that was hard to be seen by the naked eye and crashed into each other in the middle of the arena. It was the same move, but it was a clash without any fancy tricks. Naturally, the stronger side would win. Facing Cain, who weighed more than a ton and also had innate divine strength, Garush was sent flying. Today, in the duel, Cain did not use his favorite totem pole. Instead, he used a long axe that was more suitable for his hands. Without giving Garush any time to react, Cain activated Spirit's Wrath, and then used Heroic Leap to catch up with Garush, who was flying backwards, and swung his axe down. Close combat. An inch shorter was an inch more dangerous. The price of gaining agility was that the side with a longer attack range would have an advantage. Therefore, there was another saying that an inch longer was an inch more powerful. The Ox-Head chief was already stronger to begin with. Coupled with his full strength, the axe that came down from above forced Garush to forcefully parry it with Bloodhowl in midair. Bang! It was a fierce blow that shook the entire arena. Garush was sent flying like a cannonball. First, he crashed to the ground, then his entire body bounced up again under the impact. Finally, he rolled 5 times in a sorry state, plowing a thick line on the thick red ground before he finally stopped. Ah! There was an uproar among the beast men, while the Taurens, trolls, and Forsaken cheered. Garush! Surrender! Cain roared. Garush used blood howl to support his body and said angrily, "Cain, you've angered me. Then I'll beat you until you submit." Cain rushed over with large strides, raised his battle axe, and launched a fierce attack. It was an unquestionable suppression. In terms of experience, 10 Garushes could not compare to Cain. In terms of strength and equipment, Cain also completely defeated Garush. The Ox-Head Chief was at the strongest moment of his life. Be it experience or physique, he was at his peak. Compared to him, Garush was too inexperienced. At some point in time, the beastmen's cheers had stopped. They stared at the brownish-red figure that was being suppressed with ugly expressions. At this moment, Garush was more of a defensive fighter than Cain. Of course, as a member of the Hellscream family, Garush had learned 70% to 80% of Lord Howl's jump slash. Seizing an opportunity, Garush fiercely counterattacked from the bottom up, finally using his axe to block Cain's battle axe. Garush seized the opportunity and jumped high. Because only then could he make up for the difference in height and physique between him and Cain, and better hit Cain's head. He wanted to chop down this Ox-Head Chief who had embarrassed him. Unfortunately, he was too inexperienced, and the jumping route he chose was not good. Almost at the instant he jumped, Cain's left hand grabbed his leg and slammed him to the ground in a wrestling position. Ah! Garush spat out a mouthful of blood from the violent impact with the ground. This was only the beginning. Cain was like a broken cloth bag. He continued to grab Garush's foot and continued to smash him violently. Left throw, right throw, left throw, right throw. Cain, who was swinging his arms, directly humiliated the current chief with absolute strength. Garush was thrown so hard that the world spun and he could not hold on any longer. At this moment, he waved Bloodhowl randomly, as if he had hit something. That's right. The tip of the axe blade had indeed slashed across Cain's chest. There were over 100 wounds on his body, and Cain, who was injured in almost every battle, did not think much of this injury. However, he immediately realized that his chest was violently numb, followed by an unbearable feeling of suffocation. Cain let go of Garush's leg and touched the wound on his chest. He saw that a considerable part of his blood had turned green. He realized what it was. Poison. Cain's eyes widened, and this scene was witnessed by Cain's son, Ben. Just as Cain's entire body was almost paralyzed, the furious Garush pounced over. The red battle axe he raised high emitted a demonic scarlet light. "Father, no," Ben cried out in shock. It was too late. Cain, who was poisoned, could not move at all. As the axe chopped down, thunderous cheers erupted among the orcs. Garush raised Cain's head high and let out a victorious roar. Chapter 1836. Not many people could understand what had just happened. Because of the distance and vision, everyone only saw that Cain was indeed suppressing Garush, but at the last moment, Garush directly killed Cain. The wild cheers of the crowd covered everything, including Bane's shout, "Poison! Garush's axe is poisonous. That despicable guy murdered my father." Did anyone hear that? Yes, all the Taurens around, including Wajin, Varrock, Dranos, Garavix and others not far away, heard it. Although every orc around them was cheering and roaring, at least they all noticed this scene. The duel just now was definitely unreasonable. There was a huge conspiracy behind it. Delano jumped off the arena and flipped over Cain's body while suppressing the unhappiness in his heart. He immediately saw the green venom on Cain's chest and the strange green color on the edge of the great chief's blood roar. Wajin stared at this scene, then he suddenly turned his head and shouted, "Varrock Salufar." Wajin called out a name. He not only called Varrock, who was the notary, but also the warlord who held the core military power of the tribe. Only Varrock was qualified to declare this a shameful makara, and only he could redress Kane's grievances. Varrock's mouth squirmed for a long time, but in the end, he could not spit out a word. Declare this duel invalid? Easy. This kind of obvious evidence, as long as he shouted at Varrock, would be able to prove it immediately. But what about after that? Garush was bound to be despised by the entire tribe, and then who would lead the tribe? There was no talent in the tribe who could be the great chief. Although Garush was reckless, he at least killed the traitor and won. Except for him, no one could suppress the current young orcs. Perhaps it was a mistake to let him continue to be the chief, but who would dare to say that they would be able to lead the tribe out of this desperate predicament? Wajin? No, his identity as a troll was a huge problem. He could not suppress these young orcs. And although Garush had a bad personality, his personal strength was definitely the best in the tribe. Unless it was Gruul, no one, including Woking, could beat him in Makarali. Thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind. In the end, he sighed and lowered his head. Workin understood, and he did not blame Varrock for his choice. There was only endless sorrow. He turned around and walked past Bane, patting the next leader of the Tauran tribe who had witnessed his father being murdered. One day, we will make Garush pay for this blood debt. Without waiting for Bane to respond, Wajin left the dueling field. The poison was not done by Garush, but by Magatha Grim Totem. But that was no longer important. That night, Garush decided to hold a banquet in Agrima and hung Kane's head on the city gate. Everything was blamed on Garush. That same night, Woken found Varrock, took out an oath written on wyvern skin, and declared to him. From this moment on, Woken, on behalf of the Darkspear Trolls, officially declare our peaceful departure from the tribe in accordance with the terms of the declaration made with Chief Sar. If Garush chooses to advance, we, the Darkspear Trolls, will wait for the war in the Echo Islands. Of course, you can also raise your axe to me at this moment, and I will respond with my spear. Varrock was stunned, his lips trembling. Is this necessary? You have made your choice. The Darkspear Trolls have also made their choice. That's all. Without accepting any persuasion, Woken left Varrock standing alone in the chieftain's hall. What was even more shocking was that almost immediately after, Dranos also found Varrock. The Forsaken have announced their departure from the tribe. No. This is not true, you are. I used to be an orc, and you used to be my father. But I am already dead, and the dead are not qualified to have the same rights as the living, are they? Garush didn't think much of me anyway. But I am now the leader of the Forsaken, and I have to be responsible for my people. So be it, father, if you can't stay. Welcome to Winterspring. Or, like our chieftain's father, Grom, you can rely on Duke Marcus. For you, that is also a good choice. Ignoring his father who was completely speechless, Delanos used his ice-cold body to hug his father who still had blood flowing and body temperature, then threw down an oath and left proudly. That night, the goblins and Taurans also announced their departure. Garrawek said in his sharp voice, I don't mind owing people money, but I really mind being owed money. The tribe owes me too much money. Sar can't pay it back, Garush doesn't want to pay it back at all, and wants my life. The Rustwater conglomerate is finished with the tribe. You want the Rustwater conglomerate to return to the tribe? Yes, pay us the money you owe first. Ben said resolutely, this is an unfair duel. The Taurans do not recognize Cairn Bloodhoof's glorious death. The Taurans have no intention of fighting against the tribe, but if the tribe chooses to attack Mulgore, the Taurans will fight to the end at Thunder Cliff. Overnight, the tribe fell apart. When Varrock handed the 4 contracts to give up the tribe's identity to Garush, who woke up with a hangover the next morning, Garush lost his temper on the spot. Betrayal. This is a shameless betrayal. Who gave them the right to betray the tribe? Garush flew into a rage on the spot. Varrock was unmoved. This was set by the previous chieftain, Sar, when he pulled the 4 major races into the tribe. At that time, all the chieftains of the tribe signed the agreement, including me representing the Blackstone clan, Sar representing the Frostwolf clan, and Grom representing the Warsong clan, which is your father. Back then, every chieftain agreed that all races were equal and had the right to leave peacefully as long as the tribe was not in a state of war. Garush clutched his slightly painful head. Isn't the tribe in a state of war now? Who ordered it to be lifted? It's you, chieftain. After you killed Cairn Bloodhoof, you personally announced this decision in front of thousands of orcs at the banquet last night, Varrock said in a deep voice. Garush's face suddenly turned red. He did not admit his fault, but instead vented his anger on the few chieftains. In any case, abandoning the tribe without permission is betrayal. I want to punish those who dare to leave the tribe behind my back. Garush waved his bloody roar. As the chieftain, of course you have the right to declare war. Remember, if you do this, it means that you are declaring war on the 4 major races at the same time, and they are very likely to fall to the alliance. The most important thing is that we neither have a ship to the Echo Islands nor enough food to support an army of more than 100,000 to attack any other race. Varrock retorted coldly. Chapter 1837. By the way, the Kodo, which was the best at carrying things, had also been brought back by the Minotaurs. The horde could only rely on hard labor. Or use war wolves to pull the carts. Garush was stunned. Didn't I order for the barren lands to be hunted? Varrock said, the barren lands don't have enough prey to support an army of 500,000. Even if the Great Rift Valley is an oasis, it won't do. In the later stages of the game, our hunters would have to travel more than 50 miles to hunt every day. To put it bluntly, the Alliance was waiting for the horde to start a war. Varrock had sworn that no matter who the chief was, he would obey the orders of the one in the position. The brave beast men would always keep their oaths. He was very satisfied with the beastmen's sense of supremacy. If the horde did not listen to a single warning, he would immediately kill them. After more than 3 hours, the 4 women were finally taken care of. Duque, who was hugging one on each side, opened a bottle of 1982 Sprite. Kalia was a little confused. She tilted her head. Is that so? Elucia, who was lying on the chaise longue, laughed. I knew it. In the business world, Duque, what you've been doing all this time is stealing raw materials. If you really want the horde to be good, you should do what we did to help Kalia. Not only should we buy raw materials, but we should also build railways and factories in the places of production. We can also improve the local industry while doing fine processing. Garush was furious that the 4 leaders had left without saying goodbye. He did look down on the other races, but that did not mean he did not enjoy the pleasure of commanding them. Everyone? Jaina was stunned. But would the beast men dare? Hee. The horde has endured long enough. For 12 years, Duque, who had been advocating cooperation between the Alliance and the horde in public and in private, finally admitted his attitude towards the horde in private for the first time. After Garush came to power and tore up the trade treaty with the Alliance immediately started a Cold War. Duque opened a portal and went to several places. He dragged Kalia from Lordaeron, Elucia from South Sea City, and Tyron from Mount Hyjal. Even worse, he could not find a place to rob even if he wanted to. Actually, it was not as if there were none. The most prosperous places in Orgrimmar were Azhara and Grey Valley. Ha ha ha. Good news. Great news. Dooku was beaming with joy. Such a big event, we should find everyone to celebrate. Most of the time, Garush felt that the Tauren and Trolls were troublesome races that only gave him complaints about not being able to live. When they did leave the tribe, Garush immediately became angry again. The irascible Garush did not give up and asked for several methods, all of which were mercilessly rejected by Varrock. When Varrock reported this to Garush, the great tribal chief flew into a rage. His violent temper made every beast man who had no choice but to enter the great tribal chief's hall tremble with fear. Tyrant was a little curious. Duke, did you want to destroy the horde from the start, or did you change your mind midway and go against the horde? In the end, he still suppressed his anger. Duque used his free hand to hold Tyron's Mount Hyjal as he said honestly, "From the start, I wanted to destroy the Horde. Unfortunately, I've never succeeded. Everything is decided by the times." He blurted out, "So many of us have died. Why is there no food left?" Only the orc tribe was left, and they had no food or resources at all. Of course, in this life, because Duque tricked Jaina in advance, her young heart suffered the most indelible blow. Jaina, who was known as fair trade with the tribe, had always been like Duque. On the surface, she acted like a good person, but in private, she never gave up on scheming against the tribe. Without airships, there would be no large-scale transportation. Oh, no. Duque had probably opened a bottle of fruit wine that the night elves had stored for 82 years with a special method and poured himself a full cup. Last night, the goblins had retreated. What made Varrock despair was that the Rustwater Consortium had taken away all the valuable things made by the goblins, such as the hot air balloon airships that connected Orgrimmar to other places. The only thing that made Varrock feel lucky was that Gurus seemed to know the gap between them and the Alliance. He did not dare to start a war with the Alliance. Otherwise, he would really be looking for death. On the other side, when Duque, who was waiting for news from Odom and Vastur, suddenly heard that the Horde had split up, Duque did not say anything. He hugged Jaina happily and spun a few times on the spot. This was because she was the one that Duque had tortured the most. Almost every inch of her skin was planted with strawberries. He wanted to go on an expedition to destroy races like the Trolls and Tauren, but was told that there was no food. This surprised him. Haha. I couldn't hold it in. Ha ha ha. Duque pretended to be stupid. Varrock said coldly, "Great Chief, we need food to fight a war. Our methods of transporting and storing food are too backward. For every bag of food we transport to the Barren Lands, we will lose 3 bags of food along the way. In order to destroy Gujar, Orgrimmar's granaries are almost empty." This caused the Horde's control over the various regions to drop by several levels. These words were nothing to a traditional orc, but they pierced deeply into Varrock Salufar's heart. For a moment, old Varrock almost wanted to pull out his axe and give this idiotic chief a good beating. In order to deal with the invasion of the Firelands, the Dalajan had already arrived at Mount Hyjal. The Alliance had stationed troops in Grey Valley, Azhara, and Theramor's Dustwallow Swamp. Among the 4 women, Jaina had the most complicated relationship with the Horde in history. Before Theramor was hit by the magic bomb, focusing Rainbow, Jaina had a very long honeymoon period with the Horde. Jaina, who was said to have sold her father out, had a very good relationship with her rumored male friend, Thrall, which caused her father trouble. The Wyverns alone could not meet the speed and quantity of transportation. The Horde did not have a railway, so all transportation would return to the more primitive era of animal power. When Duque brought all the harem he could find to Karazhan's bedroom, Duque laughed and began to break the armor of the women. Where the Duke Divine's sword was, the terrifying scene of 999 consecutive strikes shocked everyone present. Oh. If you didn't say it, I would have thought that you, Duke Marcus, were a selfless hero who only cared about the public. But that's good, it proves that I didn't misjudge you. By the way, why are you purposely tormenting me? Jaina also held a glass of wine, but she glared at Duque with dissatisfaction. Chapter 1838. Elucia burst into laughter. Silly queen, it's fortunate that the man you're with is Duque. Otherwise, you'd still be counting the money after being sold. Kalia was dissatisfied. Humph. If it wasn't for Duque forcing me, I wouldn't have wanted to be the queen. I might even become the #1 adventurer in the Alliance, as well as a professional cleric in the Alliance's hero group. Kalia's words made sense, and Elucia was defeated. The 2 girls immediately became a ball of fun. Ah! That beautiful spring scenery. Duque almost wanted to end his time as a sage and have some fun with someone else. Jaina stopped him. Let's talk business first. Otherwise, I won't be able to feel at ease. All right. Duque was a little disappointed. Don't be like this, teacher. I'll do whatever you want with the students later. Answer my question first. Duque perked up. All right. How are we going to face the horde? Jaina asked. Duque thought for a moment. First of all, the alliance must continue to maintain a lukewarm attitude towards the big tribes in a broad sense. If the tribe is divided today, Wajin will leave the tribe with his subordinates, and we will immediately rush to the Echo Islands at night, make some promises, or put some race under our protection. The alliance will be at a disadvantage. Oh. Even a veteran politician like Tyrant was surprised, much less a political noob like Kalia. Jaina blinked. Are you afraid that the tribe will think that the division of the tribe is a conspiracy of the alliance? Duque shook his head. No. Most importantly, even though Brainless Roar had torn the tribe apart, the tribe's cohesion were still there. If Garush had killed Thrall in the duel yesterday, I might consider doing it right away. But as long as the tribe is not rotten to the bone, once Sal returns, the tribe will reform into a fist. Isn't it a good chance now? Jaina asked. Duque sighed. It's a chance, but it's not enough. Our alliance is too strong and gives the tribes too much pressure. As long as there was any sign of trouble in the alliance, even if the 5 tribes had irreconcilable internal conflicts, they would immediately unite again. And the key is that the alliance still lacks a righteous cause. Tyron nodded. Yes, the alliance is indeed not a violent organization. The alliance clearly lacked a reason to wipe out the entire tribe. However, would Garush give the alliance such a reason? His brain wasn't good, but he shouldn't be that crazy, right? At least he hasn't declared war on the alliance yet. No, I think, maybe everyone underestimated his stupidity. Of course, it's just that he doesn't have the chance now. When he does. Duque scrutinized it. In this life, the tribe was even more chaotic than before, and the division was even more severe. In the end, it was because Duque's own arrangements over the years had taken effect. He commanded the alliance to suppress the horde's expansion, causing the horde's territory to shrink by at least half. At the very least, the Tirisful woodland was no longer controlled by Undercity, and the Long Song forest was no longer controlled by the Blood Elves led by Lore Thema. With less territory, the corresponding resources were far less than in history. Naturally, their ability to resist pressure was even worse. In order to ensure the survival of the beastmen, Gurus consumed the population and completely plundered the resources of the other 4 races for the beastmen to use. Naturally, the backlash was even greater. It could be said that in this matter, the alliance had already gained the absolute upper hand. Unfortunately, Nesario did not die, and Brainless Roar did not further seek death. Duque wanted the alliance to make a move, but it was still lacking a little bit. Although he was happy, Duque could only suppress the ecstasy in his heart and not announce anything to the public. At this time, Kalia said a little strangely, yes, speaking of which, you've also accepted Sister Irel. Why didn't you call her for your secret celebration, Duque? Duque had a strange look on his face. It was Jaina who giggled and said, of course we have to find her for the celebration, but there are many things that can't be told to her. If she knows, all the Drenii will know. Indeed, Hoof was a little mature. Unfortunately, she still had the mentality of a typical young girl. Anything good in one's heart could never be hidden from the people around them. It was such a big thing that Duque wanted to secretly deal with the horde. It was good enough that the various tight-lipped queens knew about it. Even if all the participants of the Throne Council had a tacit understanding, some things should not be announced in advance. At this time, Hoof sent a magic message, Duque. I heard that the horde has split. Don't say anything, come over immediately, I have something important to inform you. When Hoof stepped out of the portal, Duque did not say anything and directly pointed his sword at Hoof. After a round of Duque's 999 godly swords, the 4 women even came up to help put down Hoof, causing Hoof to exhale more than it inhaled. Then Duque slowly informed Hoof that his attitude towards the horde was to wait and see. The butterfly effect caused by Duque, the butterfly, had really changed Azeroth too much. Originally, in history, the cataclysm should have been Sal's most glorious moment. Sal, who had been promoted to the shaman of salvation because of the cataclysm, should have been widely praised throughout the entire world and received the greatest recognition from the sleeping dragon temple. Unfortunately, with Duque's existence, it seemed that there was nothing for Sal to do. At this moment, in Nagrand, Sal, who was wholeheartedly practicing the way of shaman, suddenly received news from the spirit of the earth. What? Duque killed the fire demon King Ragnaros and officially replaced it as the supreme lord of the fire elemental world? And forced all fire elemental creatures to serve the Alliance mages first? Sal's heart was like a level 12 hurricane. Because the broken planet Draenor, where Nagrand was located, was too far away from planet Azeroth, in the absence of special magic communication, it was normal to rely on the elemental spirit to transmit the news for such a long time. He felt terrible in his heart. He gave up his power and left the Horde, of course, because he was forced by the political situation. What he really wanted was to protect the world of Azeroth, to become a demigod, and to gain the recognition of him and the tribe from the Sleeping Dragon Temple. At least in the general trend, he would not be left behind by the Alliance. Otherwise, if every world-destroying event had nothing to do with the tribe, and if the Alliance really wanted to attack the tribe, the Long Sleep God Temple and the Protectors would definitely stand by and watch, or even help the Alliance. At that time, the Horde would really be finished. But Duque sitting on the throne of the King of Fire was definitely destroying Sal's plan. The way of shaman was to communicate with the elemental spirit, which was a relationship of request. It was absolutely different from Duque's, "I'm the Emperor, you do whatever I want you to do." Duque made the fire elementals serve the Alliance first. To put it bluntly, in the future, the shamans of the Horde would not be able to use fire elementals to attack the Alliance. Otherwise, they would turn around and burn the shamans first. This feeling of being stuck at the source was like being strangled by a rope that could pull you up and hang you at any time. Chapter 1839. This is bad. Duque will definitely let Sylvanas, who is already a demigod of wind, deal with Al-Akir, and let Vashj, who is also a demigod, enter the throne of tides. If all three elements are controlled by the Alliance. Thrall did not dare to continue imagining it. No. I have to change direction. The priority should be the Earth. This is my last chance to overtake them. Thrall was unknowingly getting a little impatient. He did not realize that impatience was the worst thing to do when it came to the Earth. Due to the lack of information, Thrall did not realize that there was a mortal called Magni Bronzebeard who was already so much ahead of him in the path of the Earth. While Thrall was getting impatient, Duque was enjoying the clumsy pillow talk. "Duque, let me tell you. Beast men are all brutal fellows, sob sob sob. Don't talk, savor it." Duque said righteously as he pressed down on her head and held her horn. Hoof rolled her eyes, but could only bury her head in her work. Hearing that the tribe was splitting, the Draenei, who had a deep hatred for the beast men, naturally had other thoughts. So-called forgiveness was *T to the middle and lower class Draenei. You killed my entire family. Do you expect me to say, "Long live forgiveness," and wait for you to kill me? Duque saw Hoof's clumsy but hard work and gave her some hope. Before the crisis of the world's destruction is over, the Alliance will not make any moves. At least he managed to appease Hoof and the Draenei. Anyway, those who understood would naturally understand. The key was that Duque did not say anything from start to end. After the tribe split, Duque waited bitterly for 3 days before he finally received the first piece of good news. As a demigod of the Azeroth weave, Duque was extremely sensitive to changes in the elements. After all, the biggest access points for the elements in the weave were fire and ice. The fire element flowed unimpeded, and the weave could receive as much as the fire elemental world overflowed. There was no need to be too serious in monitoring the fluctuations of the water element. Before this moment arrived, the supply of water elements was unstable. Tidehunter Neptulon had never communicated with Duque. Ever since Duque established the weave, he had been walking the path of Hydraxia's water elementals. It wasn't very generous, but at least Duke Hadasis could give him a 5% share. Suddenly, Duque was pleasantly surprised to find that the share had jumped from 5% to 51%. In the next second, the magic communication with Vashti that had been blocked for a long time returned to normal. In the magic mirror, Vashti's long red hair fluttered in the deep sea, giving off a mysterious and hazy beauty. She respectfully crossed her arms on her shoulders and bowed towards Duque on the other side of the screen. Then, she transmitted her soul voice. "Dear Master, your most loyal servant, Celia, did not disappoint you. In the tidal throne, she slew the king of sea monsters, Azamat, and saved the water elemental lord, tide hunter Neptulon. After my persuasion, Neptulon is now willing to follow me and serve you as the supreme ruler. Well done, my Celia. When you come back, I will reward you well." This conversation contained too many hidden words from both sides. Vashti clearly referred to herself as a demigod in all public occasions. But in front of Duque, she would always be the little maid that Duque saved in Azhara's palace. And Duque called her my Celia. This kind of recognition was the biggest reward for Vashti. There seemed to be some kind of liquid in the water from the corner of Vashti's eyes. That should be tears. There was another image in the magic mirror, and it immediately switched to Neptulon. Neptulon was a huge humanoid creature, almost 10 stories tall, similar to Lager. He had a dark blue humanoid upper body and a cone-like water elemental lower body, as if he was wearing a skirt. He had an almost rectangular face and hair that looked like 5 curved pieces of blue marble inlaid on it. A sapphire the size of a carriage hung on a huge golden chain. It looked very strange. He was not in good condition, because he had just been tortured by the sea monster lord. Huge whip marks and sucker bite marks could be seen all over his hard body, which looked a little like blue marble. Of course, Duque also saw the scars of swords and arrows. This scene made Duque want to laugh. Needless to say, this was the mark of Vashti persuading Neptulon on behalf of Duque. Among the 4 elemental lords, Neptulon was famous for his wisdom. During the ancient war of the Dark Empire 25,000 years ago, Neptulon the Tide Hunter was always on guard against Al-Fakir's treacherous schemes. He also controlled his subordinates to prevent them from attacking the stronghold of Sarazen the Mother of Stone. When the armies of fire, wind, and earth fought each other on the land of Azeroth, the Tide Hunter would cleverly divide and conquer his enemies. Every time the enemy tried to flee, Neptulon would sweep away the waves so high that even the tallest mountain in Salazarn would feel ashamed of itself. Neptulon liked to play with his prey, dragging them into the water and letting them escape. Sometimes, he would banish an unfortunate victim to an isolated island and let him enjoy the torment of the tides and whirlpools. He would usually try to identify who could not survive in the water for a long time and drag them far away before dealing with the rest of his opponents. He especially liked to extinguish flames, and he had a deep hatred for the fire elementals. Neptulon the Tide Hunter was the ruler of water, lakes, rivers, and oceans. All water elementals and creatures that used water and cold as their main abilities would respect him. However, today, after 25,000 years, the saying "a fallen phoenix is no better than a chicken" was used to describe Neptulon. Because he had died and revived once, his strength was no longer what it used to be. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how a mere sea monster could defeat him. In Warcraft, he was not even qualified to be the boss of a 5-man dungeon. From the fact that the final boss of the tidal throne was Azamat and not him, it was obvious how useless he was now. The great demigod of the weave, Duke Marcus. I, Neptulon, offer all my loyalty to you. From today onwards, your enemies are my enemies. My territory is your territory. It was good to talk to smart people. Stubbornly stubborn would only waste more effort. Smart spineless people were the easiest to subdue. Duque first turned his body into ice elementals, then opened a portal. In the next moment, Duque's figure appeared in the tidal throne in the deep sea. There was almost no light in the dark sea. However, with his elemental senses, Duque could clearly sense everything around him. Vashj immediately offered Duque a portion of the elements here. Chapter 1840. 1%. 10%. 30%. 51%. The elemental share was the control of the entire water elemental world. In a sense, controlling more than half of the elemental world was equivalent to controlling a super reservoir. As a ruler, he could control how much water was released. It was like fish in a dry swamp, or accumulating small amounts. An elemental world was a little different from a reservoir. It itself was like a huge nuclear reactor. The difference was that it did not flow out nuclear energy or electricity, but would continuously produce elements. This was why the elemental world overflowed with elements towards Azeroth and other planes since ancient times. Feeling that his soul touch had spread to more than half of the elemental world, including the tidal throne, when Duque absorbed 51% of the elemental share, he stopped. Master? Vashj was a little puzzled. Silagia, you take another 30%. Usually, I will give you an additional 10% of the usage. As for how you distribute it, that is your business. Yes. Vashj did as she was told. The eyes of Vashj's core subordinates all lit up: Unstable Hydus, Deepwater Lord Carathilas, Morogar Tidewalker, Yesler. They had followed Vashj for the longest 10,000 years, and the shortest was at least a few hundred years. What were they after? Wasn't it just more power, more territory, and more authority? Duque believed that Vashj could control this group of guys very well. Perhaps in time, there would be a few new water demigods born, thanks to the fact that the ancient god Enzos did not directly intervene in the affairs of the water elemental world. The elemental share here could be said to be quite complete. When Vashj killed Urzamat, she found it very funny. Urzamat actually took 40% of the elemental share and beat Neptulon, who had 30% of the elemental share, like a dog. The remaining 10% was left for Neptulon, and Duke Hydus's share was raised to 9%. The share of the entire water elemental world was decided in this way. Perhaps some people would ask why Vashj, who only had a little elemental share in the water elemental world, would beat Urzamat up. That was because the total amount of elements that Vashj controlled was higher. In fact, the Azeroth main world and the elemental world were two separate entities. The elemental concentration in the elemental world was undoubtedly the highest. Although the concentration was high, the total amount was small. The Azeroth main plane's elemental concentration was low, but the total amount was many times greater. It was as if the entire land of fire had descended into the main plane and only occupied the small southern foothills of Mount Hyjal. The water elemental realm was about the same size, just the size of Valshi. That was why Ragnaros and Al-Akir dreamed of occupying all the fire and wind elements on the main plane. Although the elements realm was the source of elements, the absolute quantity of elements in the main plane could also consume the pure elements in the elements realm. This was why Duque had applied to planet Azeroth's will to make Vashj a demigod under the direct jurisdiction of the planet. Having managed Lordamir Lake for so long, Vashj's cards were definitely better than Ozamat and Neptulon, who had torn apart the water elemental plane. For Duque and Vashj, controlling the water elemental realm was equivalent to controlling the entire Azeroth water element from the source to the branches. Although the total amount of water element on the entire planet was too shocking, far beyond the scope of a demigod's control, having both the branches and the source was unimaginable. When the water elemental realm was completely integrated with the main plane, it was foreseeable that the share of water element would become more and more valuable. The law of nature was that the winner took all. Neptulon could, of course, sense that his old rival Ragnaros was already dead. Facing Duque, the super boss who destroyed Lager, controlled the fire elemental realm, and dominated the powerful demigod Vashj, Neptulon did not dare to even fart. He had to be a coward. The water elemental realm had completely changed. From today onwards, Duke would be the ruler of this place, while Vashj would rule over the tidal throne as Duke's representative, controlling this place. Master, I still have something important to do. Please let me report to Karazhan, Vashj said very respectfully. Okay. After Vashj arranged the defense here, it was actually a territory for the 4 water element masters under her. Then, she and Duque returned to Karazhan through the portal. Although Vashj looked submissive on the outside, through the soul connection, Duque could clearly feel the excitement in her heart. Almost as soon as they stepped into the bedroom, Vashj turned back into the appearance of a high elf and wrapped around him like a beautiful snake. She clearly had a pair of long legs, but she gave Duque a soft and boneless feeling. Master, with a sickeningly sweet voice, Vashj displayed a kind of passion that did not match with a water element demigod. Duque unsheathed his godly sword, followed by sword drawing technique and sword return technique. The seemingly monotonous 2,888 consecutive stabs had an unimaginable fiery effect. In the end, Vashj, who overestimated herself and wanted to challenge Duque, ran out of stamina and was put to the ground, limp like mud. Duque raised his eyelids. This is your important matter? Nothing is more important than confirming Master's care for me. If Master doesn't trust me, then I will continue to be my personal maid. I don't want this water elemental realm. What Vashj said made sense, and Duque was speechless. This was the difference in the way people thought because of their different backgrounds. Vashj, who was born as a noble but had been a maid for Queen Ashara in the palace for a long time, still had the habit of relying on the royal power or the strong. That was something that could not be changed. Just like in the original history, Vashj, who was once independent, finally found Illidan, the unreliable doc, just because she felt that Illidan was stronger than her and that there was a better future with Illidan. So she died tragically in the Serpent Shrine cavern. In this life, she saved her soul and saw Duque as the only salvation for her body and mind, so she became Duque. Duque's focus and desire were even above her personal wishes. Duque could not help but like this loyal dog-like attribute brought about by changing history. It was so worry-free. After being intimate with Vashj for an entire day and night, Duque suddenly received an unexpected visitor, Kale, that Sunstrider. Oh, what a rare guest. I didn't expect you to visit me. This was not a polite remark. Although Duque had helped Kale back then, and Kale was very grateful to Duque, for the sake of his subordinates, Kale had to create a small circle independent of the Alliance's power circle. This group of people was under orders from the Alliance, but also a bit like an organization like Silver Dawn, with a certain degree of independence. Chapter 1841. For the sake of that group of people, and not wanting to provoke the Windrunner family, which held the power of the Blood Elves, Kale, that's relationship with Duque was always a little ambiguous. Kaizi would accept any of Duque's arrangements or orders, but he rarely came to find Duque in private. Kale, that's glanced at Vashj, who was standing beside Duque and dressed like a maid, with a dignified bearing and lustful eyes. He seemed to be a little concerned, but he also seemed to be used to it. His reaction was a little strange. What? I've already reported Vashj's attack on the water elemental realm at the throne meeting. Duque found it strange. Kaizi sighed. No, I'm just a little envious of the trust between you two, master and servant. In the past, in the circle of high elven nobles, even husband and wife would have all kinds of dirty political deals or frame each other. Duque did not know how to continue the topic. Instead, it was Vashj who blushed, which was rare. Kaizi changed the topic, stood up, and bowed deeply to Duque. When he looked up, he said in a straightforward manner, Duque, I'll also say it directly. I hope to offer my soul and loyalty to you. This. Needless to say, Duque was a little stunned. He wanted to say, you must be joking, right? But he immediately realized that Kaizi was unusually serious. What's wrong with Kaizi? Kale, that's continued, I spent the first half of my life as a prince. I used to think that seeking happiness for my compatriots and people was the whole meaning of my life. I've always encouraged myself with this. Unfortunately, my father's matter completely turned my world upside down. Duque did not say anything and let Kaizi continue. That was my father's sin, and also the sin of the Sunstrider surname. Since I'm a member of the Sunstrider, I don't regret it, nor do I blame my father. I calmly accepted this sin. I worked hard for a long time, hoping to still do something for my compatriots after removing the Sunstrider surname. Unfortunately, I discovered that Sylvanus Windrunner did a better job than I did. At this point, Kai Z sighed deeply. I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss for myself. I'm at a loss for those who believe in me and want to follow me to the death. We don't know where our future lies. Duque interrupted, you have already proved your determination and courage to fight against evil with your actions. Have you forgotten the cheers of the Blood Elves? Of course not. But we want to do more, not just for the Blood Elves, but also for this world that is constantly being invaded by evil. Because of this, my followers and I yearn for greater power. Duque frowned. You can't find your own path to power? Kale, that's became agitated, and his voice became more sonorous. No, I found it. But this is the only path that suits me, and it requires your absolute trust. Duque realized what Kai Z was referring to. Vashti, who was beside Duque, also had a fierce look in her eyes. As long as Duque gave her a look, she would not hesitate to attack Kale. Duque sat comfortably on the sofa and lay back down. His voice was a little unfathomable. You want the share of the fire elemental world that I control? I know it's shameless of me to make such a request as an outsider, but I don't have a better way, and I believe that this can solve the problem of my followers having similar symptoms of magic addiction in the future. So in exchange, my followers and I are willing to offer you all our souls. At this point, Kale, that's no longer bowed, but knelt down deeply to worship Duque. It had to be said that Kale, that was very accurate in this matter. Unlike in the fire elemental world, Duque did not have a capable assistant like Vashti in the fire elemental world. So Duque only symbolically gave Majordomo 5% and made him a manager. As for the other two guys, Sharnox, the fire demon hunter who had joined Duque in advance, gave him 3%. As for Modron, who would have become the fire elemental lord because he had chosen the tall among the short in history, that was too bad. I'll give you 1%, take it or leave it. Duque monopolized 91% of the shares and was in an absolute position of dominance. Duque's ambition was not just the fire elemental world. He had to at least take care of the arcane, fire, and frost elements to become a true god. He could not have so much energy to concentrate on managing the fire elemental world. It should be said that Majordomo was enough to manage it. The problem was that Majordomo was too weak. Even if he became a demigod, his combat power was still as high as 5 among demigods. Duque's real representative in the fire elemental world should be like Vashti, who could fight and had his deep trust. That was ideal. Kale, that's proposal scratched his itch. After all, at the end of the day, Duque could not absolutely trust Majordomo. That guy was forced to surrender by Duque. Since he could surrender to Duque, there was no guarantee that he could surrender to other powerhouses in the future. In this life, Kai Z did not fall into a state of madness because of his clansmen. His pure heart was still worthy of praise. There was no need to say who the balance in his heart was leaning towards. Duque crossed his fingers and placed them on his knees. He pretended to think for a while before nodding in agreement. Okay. I agree. There are many people who are willing to offer their souls to me in exchange for power, but not many of them have character and will that I recognize. You happen to be one of the few, so I agree. Kale, that's kowtowed heavily and said loudly, thank you, master. I'll go and call my followers over to pay their respects to the master. A few minutes later, Kai Z brought a group of subordinates and filled Duque's reception room. Greetings, master. Dozens of elves said in unison. Duque had to admit that Kale, that was quite popular. In addition, the nobles of the mages were quite unhappy with the power of the once lowly ranger faction. Not every mage who had lived for thousands of years and was used to being a big shot could condescend to be ordered around by the ranger faction. Therefore, a large number of mages joined Kale, that's. With the help of the weave, just Kai Z's subordinates alone could form a new Silvermoon Council. From now on, Master will only have the great weave demigod Duke Marcus. I, Kale, that's Sunstrider, am just one of Master's servants. Everyone, please recognize your new identities. Kai Zi instructed. Yes, dozens of people answered in unison. Kai Zi turned to Duque. Master, you can choose any one of them to be your guard or maid. Back then, Kai Zi had given Duque an astromancer, Solarian. It was unknown if he was addicted to giving them away, or if the high elves had the habit of giving girls away. In any case, Duque was still a little uncomfortable. Chapter 1842. It felt like a dynasty before the Celestial Empire, where it was normal for rich families to give their concubines away. Interestingly, the moment Kai Zi said this, one of the 4 heavenly kings beside him, the astrologer Caponia, became anxious. She stared at Kai Zi anxiously, and then felt that it was inappropriate, so she secretly tugged on Kai Zi's sleeve. Kai Zi seemed to have come to his senses and wanted to change his words, but he did not dare to open his mouth and slap himself in the face. Duque wanted to laugh at the sight of the young couple. Duque looked like he was about to snatch someone's wife. Alright, I think Caponia is not bad. When Duque said Caponia's name, Kai Zi and Caponia felt completely disheartened, as if there was nothing left for them to live for. Kai Zi immediately reacted. Back then, because he lacked courage, he had knelt in front of his great lich father, who had sought refuge with the Calamity Army. This time, he was not going to be timid anymore. He was going to say no loudly. Without paying attention to the second half of Duke's words, Kai Zi's body suddenly burst into flames and his whole body jumped up. Yes, he really jumped up. He was at least 5 to 6 centimeters off the ground. Wait. No. Caponia can't do it. When Kai Zi roared out loud, he felt as if a great river had burst its banks, and he could finally vent all the depression in his heart. Boo-hoo. I did it. Caponia, I did it. Although I might not be able to step into the demigod realm for the rest of my life, at least I'm safe. Something's wrong. Kai Zi was already prepared to face Duque's thunderous rage. After all, he was the one who went back on his word. But why was Duque smiling evilly, his blood elf followers shocked, and Caponia a little angry? Kale, that was dumbfounded. Duque leaned against the back of the sofa in satisfaction. He waved his hand, and Vashti came over to massage his back. Dumuk repeated his words with a poisonous tongue that was bubbling up. Hey, Kale, that's... What do you mean by that? Just now, I said, I think Caponia is not bad, why don't I bestow her as your wife? Then, you actually said, wait. No. Not Caponia. Are you saying that you don't like Caponia and want to offer her to me as a maid to warm my bed? No, of course not. Actually, I like Caponia. Kai finally admitted shamefully. Duque's explanation of the cause and effect was so infuriating that several guys, including the 4 heavenly kings, were already snickering. Ah. At this time, how could Kai Zi not know that he was played by Duque? He thought that Duque, who was obsessed with elves, wouldn't die so easily and would let Caponia go. Subconsciously, he thought that his little lover had been sent away because of his slip of the tongue. In the end, he was the one who fell into Duque's trap. Kai Zi's face immediately turned red, and he scratched his head in distress, not knowing what to say. But now that he had said it, Kyle felt a sense of relief. Okay, tell me, how did you get together with her? Since his master had given the order, even if it was a little embarrassing, Kai Zi could only confess. Kai Zi and Caponia's relationship seemed to be a natural one. Ever since Kai Zi became a great traitor to the elves, his 4 advisors had never abandoned him. He didn't have many capable female mages around him. Originally, there was the great astrologer Solarian. In order to help Kai Zi out, Solarian had volunteered to serve Duque. In a sense, this was also an opportunity. Duque had more or less put in more effort to help Kai Zi wash away the stigma of being a traitor. But this way, Kai Zi would only be left with Caponia. It was easy to feel lonely away from home. In the long night, if he wasn't looking for someone to talk to, he would sink into loneliness. Back then, the four advisors were naturally the ones that Kai Zi talked to the most. Was it easier to talk to a few men, or was it easier to talk to a girl who was kind and understanding? As time went by, Caponia succeeded in getting the position. To be honest, if Duke was given a choice, when he first arrived in Azeroth, he would probably choose the elves. Even Caponia might not be the best choice. Since he already had the famous 3 Windrunner sisters, why would he need other high elves? Just having the 3 Windrunner sisters was equivalent to having all the girls in the high elves. Not to mention Caponia, even Duque hadn't touched Solarian, who was a maid. Dumoke wasn't a stud, so why would he lower himself to F***ck a girl who was a level lower? So, not only did Duque bless Kai Zi and Caponia, he also gave Kai Zi a 10% share of the land of fire elements. Here's your AO. I think the surrounding environment will be very suitable for you and your phoenix. Duque opened the 3D map of the land of fire and seemed to have given Kai Zi a piece of land. Kai Zi didn't see it at first, but when he saw it clearly, he immediately thanked him profusely. How could that place not be suitable? It turned out that it was the territory of Elisarazer, who had betrayed the alliance and turned from a green dragon to a fire hawk. As a place to cultivate a pure-blooded fire hawk, it was also quite suitable to cultivate a phoenix. It could be foreseen that as long as Kai Zi displayed his talent and completely combined his power with his phoenixes, he would soon become a demigod of fire. After sending Kai Zi and the others away, Duque returned to the study and began to think while enjoying Vasht's verbal service. He thought that he should have accumulated enough capital to embark on the path of a true mage god after obtaining the control of all the elements in the water and fire elemental realms. The reason why Duque gave out his share so generously was that Duque had determined through the system elf that even if he took out 100% of the elements, including all the ice and fire elements in the elemental realm and the entire Azeroth, it still wouldn't be enough. To be specific, it wasn't a problem of quantity, but a serious lack of quality. What was annoying was that this was like a puzzle. If one piece was missing, he could still find out which piece was missing. But now, it felt like at least half of it was missing. The rest that could be judged was like broken glass, all in strange shapes that people couldn't make heads or tails of. Sigh. At this time, a comfortable feeling came. After a while, Vasht raised her head. Master, what are you thinking about? Nothing, I'm just thinking about how I can become a true god. Everyone has improved, but I've been stuck at demigod for so long. Vasht laughed. How could it be so easy? Before the ancient war, the white deer god Malorn had been stuck at the demigod realm for tens of thousands of years, but he still couldn't ascend. Let nature take its course. Duque was stunned. He thought about it and agreed. This kind of thing couldn't be rushed or forced. Then let nature take its course. Chapter 1843. Duque looked into the distance. With the help of the magician's eyes, he could see the situation near Oldham thousands of miles away. Servanas was a very proud man deep down in his bones. Without Duque, perhaps she would still be an arrogant elf in this life even if she did not become the undead queen. It was because she was venting her dissatisfaction at Duque while blowing Duque's pillow talk that Duque could not do anything to her. When you peek at my battle, it makes me feel that you don't trust me. If you stay in the shadow behind me every time, ready to support me at any time, it will make me feel very useless. Before leaving to fight against AO Trash, Queen Sylvanas said this to Duque in a half-complaining tone. Duque really could not do anything to Queen Sylvanas. Some women were willing to give up everything without reservation. Some women always wanted to keep their own territory, so that they could have a breathing space. Queen Sylvanas' independence and the pride that appeared from time to time was more like her trademark, even to the extent that it was already a part of her soul. Sometimes she would bring trouble to Duque, and sometimes she would surprise Duque. This always made Duque love and hate. Duque did not dare to directly look into the wind god's throne. Unlike the great screw Laga, who only realized that the enemy was right in front of him, whether it was Ao Trash or Queen Sylvanas, those who played with the wind element were extremely sensitive. As long as Duque dared to inject his arcane elements into the wind god's throne, the two big bosses would definitely find out immediately. It was fine if Al-Akir found out. Anyway, Duque did not intend to let this guy live, but Queen Sylvanas. If he did not handle it well, there would be turmoil in the harem. Speaking of which, Queen Sylvanas was pregnant with Duque's child. A pregnant mother could not be provoked. Duque could only bitterly use the most secretive method to set up a batch of passive sensing tactics for the wind element. There was no way. Duque did no magic of the 6 major elements, but among the 3 elements of nature, holy, and shadow, Duque was the weakest in nature. Not to mention that the nature element included wind, thunder, and other branches. In front of the real demigod of wind, he was just an amateur. Fortunately, Duque also had his own unique skills. He could roughly judge the current situation of the battle based on the flow and proportion of the wind elements. Oh. We've already passed the Wind Council? Duque was a little surprised. The Wind Council was one of the 4 heavenly kings under Al-Akir. As the Lord of South Wind, Siamat, was imprisoned by the Nephesite, one of the 3 major tribes of Oldham, Al-Akir's deputies eagerly wanted to fill the power vacuum that appeared in the Wind Council. The remaining 3 members of the council were Anshul, the Lord of West Wind, who could heal his allies or poison his enemies with wind, Loash, the Lord of East Wind, who could grind the grandest mountains into dust with his wind, and Nishal, the Lord of North Wind, who had lost more lives than the other 3 combined. Doesn't it sound like the 3 counselors are pretty awesome? In reality, that was all there was to it. After all, the equipment dropped by the Wind Council was not that great. When Duque was still a player, the so-called random enchantment that dropped equipment caused many of his team members to bleed profusely. What really deserved Duque's attention was the change in the proportion of the wind elements. Duque sensitively discovered that the proportion of elements in the wind elemental realm had changed. In addition to Queen Sylvanas, who had already interfered, there were 2 more share controllers. They had a very similar but different aura to Queen Sylvanas. Duque almost immediately recognized that it was the aura of Aurelia and Sasha. Duque's heart leaped with joy. Territories needed to be managed, and blindly plundering and squeezing was not advisable. Obtaining enough elements also meant paying the corresponding responsibility. Just like how Duque chose Vashj as the representative of the water elemental realm and made Kaisi a trusted aide of the fire elemental realm. In the end, Queen Sylvanas still chose her sisters as her deputies. Of course, this made Duque feel gratified. At the same time, it also meant that Aurelia and Sasha also had the ability to hurt Al-Akir. Feeling the intense and frenzied movement of the wind elements, Duque could totally imagine how fierce the battle in the wind god's throne was. In fact, it was just as Duque imagined. After beating up the 3 idiots of the Wind Council, Queen Sylvanas used a small trick to deceive Al-Akir and did not immediately discover that the council was completely annihilated. This allowed Queen Sylvanas to recuperate and let her sisters come over to absorb the power and element share of the 2 wind lords. When the 3 sisters were done, Al-Akir, who felt that something was wrong, appeared. His figure was similar to Ragnaros's. The huge amount of elements in his body made him extremely huge. His height alone was more than 10 stories high. The length and volume of his lower body were immeasurable because his lower body was a few layers of tornadoes that rotated clockwise or counterclockwise. The decoration on his upper body was a little ridiculous. Al-Akir had a purple bun that looked like a Hindustani. The purple bandage-like band covered almost his entire face. Only 2 flashing purple lights could be seen, which could be considered his eyes. The main parts of his body were covered with thick platinum armor. On the left and right shoulder plates, there were 2 flashing electric balls that emitted the power of violent thunder suspended in the air. Wrapped in purple silk ribbons with gold edges was a pair of pure wind elemental arms. Seeing Queen Sylvanas and her sisters, Al-Akir raised his arms angrily. Greedy and shameless mortals, not only do you want to step into the divine realm, but you also covet my throne and my power? Queen Sylvanas responded with contempt. Haha. You dare to collude with Zoth in order to obtain the rule of the entire Azeroth. Have you never thought that there would be a day when you would be counterattacked? I really admire your naivety. If the word naivety was used to describe a little girl, it would be a compliment. To describe a lord of elements who had lived for tens of thousands of years, it would be utter contempt. Queen Sylvanas easily provoked Al-Akir's anger. The wind element was not a good-tempered fellow. Al-Akir was not as irascible as Lager, but he was not far behind. Al-Akir would not be nice to a thief like Queen Sylvanas who wanted to seize the throne. Queen, let me help you. Gavinrad waved his wind sword and slashed at Al-Akir. Al-Akir suddenly flew into a rage. Son. Bastard human. Shameless human. How dare you use my son's power to attack me? Gust of wind. At first, Gavinrad did not understand why Al-Akir suddenly changed his target when he wanted to kill Queen Sylvanas first. But when he heard Al-Akir's angry roar, he realized that he was the one who caused trouble. Chapter 1844. Gavinrad had been playing with the wind sword for a long time. It was so long ago that Kirin had forgotten that Thunder Wrath, Wind Seeker's blessed sword, actually sealed Prince Thunderan's soul inside the sword and kept extracting the prince's power, hence the special effect of the wind sword. It wasn't his fault that he had forgotten. After all, this was one of the earliest divine weapons of the Alliance of Heroes. Who was Prince Thunderan? Wasn't it just Al-Akir's son? Using the power of his son's smash to slash his father didn't need to say anything. Gavinrad, who had never had enough aggro and was often not a good MT, pulled the aggro very well this time. What? Defensive knights were only good at pulling group monsters and not tanking the boss because they didn't have enough aggro? That was impossible. At least not this time. At this moment, whether it was the bitter comrade Gavinrad or Sylvanas, they both understood Dumuk's sinister intentions. Duque had promised not to interfere with Queen Sylvanas' threats and promises. Now it seemed that he wasn't just interfering, he was practically sticking his hands and feet into it. As a demigod of wind, Queen Sylvanas' physical attributes weren't greatly enhanced, at least in terms of vitality. Compared to her speed, magic, and attack power, her vitality wasn't even worth mentioning. It could be said that if Queen Sylvanas was hit hard by Al-Akir, she might not die, but Duque's unborn child might be finished. In a life-and-death battle of this level, how could Queen Sylvanas reduce her chances of getting hurt to zero? This wasn't a game where there was a main tank and defensive warrior to take most of the damage from the boss. In reality, bosses weren't stupid. They all had brains and wouldn't be affected by aggro pulling skills like taunt or armor break. The boss would attack someone purely because they were a greater threat to him. Of course, there was one exception, and that was the true meaning of ridicule. Queen Sylvanas was here to seize power, so she would at most be considered an attempted crime. What about Gavinrad? He had witnesses and material evidence and could be directly convicted. Every bit of power in the wind sword in his hand came from the soul of Prince Thunderan, who was sealed in the sword. The prince's soul led the gathering of wind elements, which resulted in the wind sword special effect. It could be said that every time Gavinrad swung the wind sword, it was as if the prince's soul was wailing. The whispers in other people's ears became terrible lines in Al-Akir's ears. The following content is purely a free translation of the distorted version. If there are any similarities, it is purely coincidental. Yamit. Papa, save me. So painful, sob sob sob. These voices sounded like they had been smashed by a grass mud horse 10,000 times, so Gavinrad was completely enraged. A powerful move sent Gavinrad flying into the sky. Well, it was like a home run, flying out in one go. Above his head was a boundless azure sky. Beneath his feet was a boundless blue ocean. Gavinrad wasn't skydiving, he was skydiving. Gavin Rad had never been afraid of anyone. Even if the two commanders of the Burning Legion were here, he would still dare to fight back. The premise was to keep his feet firmly planted on the ground. Had this guy ever been sent flying into the air and then completely freefall? Wah! Gavin Rad was so scared that he almost sh*t himself. Help! I'm going to die. Not only that, Al-Akir's hatred was not appeased. His huge wind elemental hands pushed out continuously. Ha! 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 It was a continuous stream of lightning arrows that were like Gatling guns. Streaks of long lightning radiance really looked like the tracer bullets of a machine gun, drawing out dazzling arcs of light in the bright sky. This was the aura that Gavin Rad wouldn't stop until he was beaten to a pulp. Paladins were supposed to be a symbol of courage. Seeing this guy dancing and screaming, Queen Sylvanas was both amused and annoyed. She waved her hand, and the wind element that belonged to her instantly rolled out. Gavin Rad felt like he was riding on the clouds. He made a big circle and actually flew back to the platform of the wind god throne. With the support of the demigod of wind, Queen Sylvanas, Gavin Rad, who did not learn from his mistakes, shouted, "Let me tell you, this, Thunder's Fury, blessed sword of the Wind Seeker, represents Prince Thundern's blessing to me, **t. Al-Trash was enraged again. This time, it was the ice storm that was like a Category 12 hurricane. The violent tornado swept up thousands of white clouds and gathered an extreme chill. It crashed violently into Gavin Rad, the enemy who killed his son. F***ck%yen #at. Before Gavin Rad could finish cursing, he was sent flying again. Air was the medium for transmitting sound. If the air became an irregular turbulence, then the transmission of sound would be impossible. The second half of Gavin Rad's curse was eaten up by the ice storm. Queen Sylvanas and Gavin Rad weren't the only ones who came to attack Al-Akir. The others held back their laughter and attacked Al-Akir, who didn't care about anything. This was especially so for Aurelia and Sasha. Every arrow that the sisters shot out would leave holes of various sizes on Al-Akir's body. If Al-Trash was a human, they would have shot out bloody holes one after another on his body. It could be said that because Al-Akir attacked Gavin Rad crazily, everyone had a stable environment to attack and output. This time, Gavin Rad, who was sent flying, became a large ice block the size of a wardrobe. Through the bumpy surface of the ice, he could see that this guy had been sent flying with his arms and legs wide open. But in the next second, the ice block was crushed by Queen Sylvanas with a gust of wind. Gavin Rad, whose lips were purple from the cold, was sent back by the wind. Gavin Rad was furious too. He raised his wind sword and shouted, "Ha! I, Gavin Rad, am back. Al-Akir, let me tell you, I am the unkillable cockroach that Duque mentioned. Although I don't know what a cockroach is." Before he could finish his words, he was sent flying again. No wind, no ice. This time, it was lightning. Aura, 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 aura. The violent, lightning strike was launched from Al-Trash's hands. Even though Gavin Rad had activated Holy Shield, the powerful natural elemental attack still broke through his Holy Light Shield. If it wasn't for Sally Whitemane's powerful healing spell, at the last moment, he might have already died. Even so, there was still an unknown object that looked like a burnt corn or a dark paladin flying through the sky. "Queen Sylvanas, I'll call you Queen Sylvanas just like Duque. Can we make a deal? Don't send me back." Gavin Rad was about to cry. Sylvanas said seriously, "Winds return." A minute later. "No. No. I admit defeat. Please don't send me back. Wind return. I'm really going to die." A certain paladin was furious. Wind, return. Chapter 1845. Anger was a double-edged sword. It could give people strength and explosive power, but it could also make people lose their rationality and judgment. Al-Akir was not human, but he also had emotions, and that was enough. Gavin Rad was the poisonous bait that Duque had set up to feed to Al-Trash. Regardless of whether Al-Trash ate this poisonous bait, it would greatly distract him. Unless it was an existence without emotions, as long as it was an intelligent creature, it would be difficult for it to remain indifferent to the enemy who killed its children. Holy Knights were famous for being able to fight and take damage. Even though Gavin Rad seemed a little weak. As one of the remaining 5 Silver Saints, he had escaped the shackles of fate and escaped the fate of death from Arthas. After going through so many battles, his vitality and endurance were infinitely close to the demigod realm. With the support of so many healers, and the storm armor that Queen Sylvanas secretly gave him, it was difficult for him to die even if he wanted to. It was just a little hard for him to keep getting beaten up. In fact, when Al-Akir chased after him, he had already accepted his fate. It was just that he would not feel good if he did not curse out loud. When Al-Akir woke up from his anger, it was already a little too late. The attackers led by the 3 Windrunner sisters and the Storm Warden Amaran took advantage of the time when he was beating Gavin Rad to quietly deplete 75% of his wind element. Elemental creatures did not have a specific pain system. Only damage that directly pierced the soul would cause them to be alert. However, the high-purity wind element that belonged to Al-Akir was actually his life force. With 3/4 of his life force gone, Al-Akir finally woke up. You treacherous thieves! Wild wind! Listen to my command, go with the wind. Little bugs! Following Al-Akir's domineering declaration, an unprecedented storm swept through the sky. It was a terrifying storm that could cut rocks into pieces and pulverize bricks into gravel. Not only was there frost, but there was also terrifying lightning that danced like snakes. Amaran created a tornado that was independent of Al-Akir's power to protect everyone. The people were saved, but the platform that carried the Wind Council's Wind Lord suddenly collapsed. Ah! Many Alliance heroes screamed. Especially heroines. It was easy to feel weak if one's feet were not firmly planted on the ground. The sudden feeling of weightlessness was torturous. For example, Sally was the one who shouted the loudest. From the Molten Core until now, Sally was an old member of the Alliance's hero squad. From a little girl to a slender and elegant young lady, Sally could be said to be a veteran. Unfortunately, some things just couldn't get used to, so she was the one who screamed the loudest. Miss Sally, please stop screaming. Hajaran Mingi couldn't take it anymore. In theory, Her Majesty the Windrunner Queen will save us soon. Of course, I have the slow fall spell. Why, is Miss Whitemane going to become a mage? Millhouse made a suggestion that was out of place. In fact, in the next second, Queen Sylvanas shouted. The eye of the storm, the stones that were supposed to fall rapidly due to gravity began to spin strangely in the air, trembling. Some of the tiny gravel even flew higher into the sky in defiance of gravity. Every mortal who was falling suddenly felt that there was something under their feet. With just a thought, the wind around their bodies all listened to their commands, moving them up, down, left, right, back and forth. Everyone, including Storm Watcher Amaran, realized that they could actually fly, and their speed was 300% of their normal movement speed. This is the eye of the storm? Amaran was a little shocked. Haha. I can fly. Riadaline was very happy. That's amazing. Solon and Leander were in awe. If not for the fact that they were facing a strong enemy, everyone would definitely enjoy the feeling of flying freely. Gavin Rad, where are you going? I suddenly remembered that I have something urgent to do. A certain paladin said with a sobbing voice. Queen Sylvanas smirked, and with a wave of her hand, she grabbed Mr. Gavin Rad, who was trying to slip away and fly as far as he could. In fact, Queen Sylvanas' actions were a little redundant. Aulakar, who had woken up, was already suppressing his own unhappiness. He ignored the little bug Gavin Rad and focused on dealing with her. Only Queen Sylvanas could shake the source of his power. Lightning, lightning wand, lightning cloud, static shock. Aulakar used a series of lightning attacks from the wind elemental branch to beat the hero team into a sorry state. The attack speed of lightning was faster than the wind, and it was also harder to defend against. In order to avoid injury, Queen Sylvanas had to focus more and summon lightning to intercept Aulakar's lightning. Unknowingly, it had become a battle of attrition. As an attacker fighting in the enemy's formation, this was quite disadvantageous to Queen Sylvanas. After all, in the wind god's throne, there were more wind elementals that listened to Aulakar's orders. If this continued, Queen Sylvanas would not be able to outlast Aulakar. At this time, Aurelia and Sasha stepped forward. It had to be said that the female elf's thinking was a little strange. Before they had children, they always wanted to have a child. Therefore, the two sisters were not willing to risk their lives until the last moment. But after giving birth, the two sisters were even fiercer than the fiercest Queen Sylvanas. At this moment, they completely let go of their souls and forcefully plundered the share of the wind elemental here. They did not even let go of Queen Sylvanas' share. If it were someone else, Queen Sylvanas might have turned hostile. Sisters were sisters, and there was nothing that they could not share. Seeing that she could not attack, Queen Sylvanas decisively gave up most of her wind elemental and transferred it to her sisters. In an instant, the situation of the battle changed. It felt as if there were 4 demigods surrounding and attacking Aulakar. It suddenly became Queen Sylvanas defending, while Aurelia, Sasha, and Amalran were attacking. This kind of chaotic attack made Aulakar at a loss. He was furious. He roared. He kept summoning wind, rain, thunder, and lightning to attack his enemies in various forms. But he was the best example of 2 fists being unable to fight against 4 hands. The wind elemental that had gathered on his body was rapidly being sliced off inch by inch. It was a high-speed nibbling that could be seen with the naked eye. When the 2 dazzling balls of lightning on his shoulder armor became dim, the great lord of the wind elemental world, Aulakar, was dead. Feeling the elemental authority surging toward her from all directions in the wind elemental world, Queen Sylvanas was overflowing with dominance and waved her hand. Everyone realized that many black spots were rising under their feet. Countless stone fragments that had fallen not long ago were rising against gravity. Thousands of stones gathered together, forming a huge floating island with a diameter of nearly 1 kilometer. Queen Sylvanas stood in the center of the floating island and announced loudly, "I announce. I, Sylvanas Windrunner, am the new lord of the wind elemental world." Chapter 1846. The voice of the elemental world attached to Azeroth could only be heard by the elemental world and elemental creatures in the same situation. For example, the various large and small elemental creatures in the land of fire and tidal throne that had been subdued. From Vashj and Kale, that's who stood at the top of the elemental world, to the second brothers like Majordomo and Caratheras, to the pitiful Smoldron and Neptulon who could have been big bosses but were now just third brothers, and to the elemental creatures of various levels. Those who were truly ambitious had all kinds of thoughts. Neptulon and Smoldron, who originally had some thoughts, immediately gave up on the rebellious thoughts. The situation was very clear now. Duke Marcus was aiming for the position of the Lord of the 4 elements. The fire, water, and wind realms were all under Duque's control. Then, needless to say, it was the earth elemental world's turn. Not long ago, when Neptulon saw the fire and wind realms enter Azeroth first, he was prepared to wait and see. Now, it seemed like he was simply sending himself to his death. In addition, the powerhouses closely related to the elements could also receive the news. The guardians of Mount Hyjal and the Ring of the Earth, which were dedicated to quelling the anger of the elements, were all dumbfounded. Especially the Ring of the Earth. Originally, Hamuir and the others were still holding meetings day and night to discuss how to coax the various elemental masters so that they would not come out to cause trouble and return to their respective elemental worlds. Great, now they're all fucking traitors jumping over loyal officials. As long as the 3 elemental world masters gave an order, it would immediately turn into the 3 elemental worlds ganging up on the earth elemental world. The druids in the ring of the earth suddenly felt as if they had learned the way of nature for nothing. They were learning harmony and communication. On the other side, Duque was taking the way of the king. He directly used his fists to get rid of the troublemakers and subdue the troublemakers. When he became the boss, all the turmoil would be quelled. To put it more exaggeratedly, if Duque wanted to play a specific game, he could give a strict order. Other than the local neutral elemental creatures in Azeroth, the shamans would not be able to use any water, fire, or wind elements. There were no shamans in the alliance. When the news spread that Queen Sindorii conquered the wind god throne and became the queen of the wind elemental world, the whole kingdom of Sindorii rejoiced. Almost all the elves ran to the streets to celebrate, singing and dancing. It didn't matter if Queen Sylvanas was Duque's wife or not. In any case, not only did Queen Sylvanas become a semi-god, she had also become the queen of an entire world. Even the mage faction in the country had begun to discuss whether or not they should develop wind magic on a large scale. After all, their queen was practically the goddess of wind. It would be a waste not to use such a good resource. The Alliance's Duque controlled the water and fire elemental realms, appointed Kale, That's and Vashj as overseers, while Sylvanas controlled the wind elemental realm. Even though Diehard Roar had a big heart, he still felt that it was a little unbearable. It was true that the beastmen played the berserker style, but while they revered the warrior class, the shaman's teachings were the true tradition. Shaman priests were not only respected professionals, but also the core of the tribe's military. Earth, water, fire, and wind, these four elements would be hard to bear, not to mention losing 3 of them at once. Without the water element, there would be no healing magic. Without fire, there would be no AoE attacks. Without wind. Just think about it, the legendary Wind Fury 9 consecutive strikes of the earliest shamans. Without wind, there would be no use. Once the shaman profession went up against the Alliance, it would immediately be useless. Diehard Roar fell into a rare long silence. On the other side, Duque had rushed to New Silvermoon City to welcome the triumphant return of Queen Sylvanas and her party as half a master. Before he could hug his 3 lovers for a long time, Gavin Rad rushed out like lightning and hugged Duque tightly. Duque's eyes were filled with the charred armor that this guy was wearing. Duque. I'm going to die. I don't want to live anymore. Back then, I blocked a knife for you, I withstood Logger's hammer for you, and now I've withstood 100, lightning, strikes for your fiancé. My life is so bitter, sob sob sob. I'm old, maybe I won't make it soon. It would be strange if I really can't carry the leader. It was worth mentioning that Gavin Rad's acting was terrible. After howling for a long time, he couldn't even bear to use a few drops of eye drops. It was just a few lines over and over again. What he meant was, I've shed blood and tears for you, Boss Duque. Don't call me when you're fighting bosses in the future, and remember to call me when you're picking up cheap loot. Duque's facial muscles were stiff. He pretended to comfort Gavin Rad, why don't I let you retire with honor like Mograine? I'll convince your wife to accept your women and illegitimate children outside. For my sake, your wife won't say anything. Gavin Rad's face instantly turned pale. He immediately stood up and thumped his chest armor. He decisively expressed his loyalty. Actually, I'm not even 50 yet. I think I can still fight for another 15 years. That was what he said, but his sorrowful eyes gave Duque goosebumps. Queen Sylvanas's cold voice came from behind him. The wind elemental realm will give you 1%. Gavin Rad immediately continued to howl. Boss, I've shed blood for you, 3%. Forget it if you don't want it. Her Majesty Sylvanas finally gave her verdict. Ah. I suddenly remembered that I have other important things to do. I won't stand in the way of your reunion, boss. Gavin Rad, who had gotten the benefits, left immediately. Queen Sylvanas was indifferent, but she actually uttered a classic line, ha. Men, she flicked her long blonde hair gently. That disdainful look, that aura with its own background music, that arrogant demeanor, she was simply invincible. Did she become arrogant after taking control of the wind elemental realm? Duque bared his teeth, a little depressed. He had suppressed Queen Sylvanas a while ago. Why did she seem to be gaining momentum recently? In any case, he was the father of the child in her belly, and he was her public fiancé. It wasn't too much to give her a public hug, right? Faced with Duque who opened his arms, Queen Sylvanas still hugged him. It was a warm hug as usual, but she whispered in Duque's ear, "I'm angry. You put Gavin Rad in my team because you don't believe in my ability." "Well, I really, humph. Forget it. Since you're going to be a father, you're so worried about us. I'll let you pass this time." After that, Queen Sylvanas secretly breathed in Duque's ear. "Tonight, from behind, wow. That's a lot of information. You already know it's a daughter? Why is it a daughter again? By the way, are all demigods so awesome? You already know now?" And from behind. Duque snickered. Chapter 1847. As the saying goes, a daughter is a father's lover in his previous life. A good daughter is very considerate. She might even say, "I don't want to get married, I want to stay with my father forever." It's sweet to think about it. Son. Damn you. You'll know what differential treatment is when you have a son. If you accidentally press on a woman's hair, she'll yell at you. When that fat boy is born, he'll snatch away your special dumpling. His mother won't say anything even if he pulls and bites you. If you talk louder and disturb the son, you'll be sentenced to death. No matter how much trouble the son makes, he'll be acquitted. He'll say, "If you run away, there'll be a man in the future." According to Queen Sylvanas's character, she'll cut you with a knife the next moment. It's definitely a good thing that she's pregnant. In the future, she'll inherit her mother's beauty, just like Aurelia and Sasha's daughter. Just like Annihilus and Atlanta, they'll definitely be as beautiful as their mother when they grow up. In theory, they have different surnames. But are they the new Windrunner sisters? That night, Duque was a little annoyed. In the past, when he caught Queen Sylvanas, he'd occasionally say, "If you're so awesome, why don't you go to heaven?" Well, this time, Queen Sylvanas was ready. She even had an oars pose. Just as Duque was about to swing his sword and mount her, she really flew. She stuck to the ceiling of the bedroom and refused to come down. "What do you mean by flying above my head?" Duque was angry. I'm scared." The fearless Queen Sylvanas actually had this kind of moment. This time, it was Duque's turn to be annoyed. If Aurelia and Sasha hadn't become traitors and flown up to the bedroom to catch Queen Sylvanas, he didn't know what would have happened. After half a night, the three Windrunner sisters were finally dealt with. Facing Queen Sylvanas, who was pretending to be a corpse, Duque punched her but hard. "I shouldn't have spoiled you so much and let you be the demigod of wind. Now you're making trouble for me." Queen Sylvanas couldn't keep up the act and turned around. "Then what do you want? Take back my demigod status?" "No, I'm just asking, when will your pursuit of power end?" Duque's question made Sylvanas stare blankly for a moment, and then a little discouraged. I actually didn't think about it. All right, I admit that I'm just unsatisfied. I can do whatever you think you can do. I just want to prove to the world that I, Sylvanas Windrunner, can still be strong and live a wonderful life without you, Duque." Without beating around the bush, Queen Sylvanas spoke her mind. At this time, Aurelia got up and touched her sister's nose. Even if you don't want to admit defeat, you should at least have a plan. You went to fight Al-Akir while you were pregnant, and you still dare to complain that Duque stuffed Gavin Rad in as insurance? The Windrunner family doesn't have such an ungrateful woman. Queen Sylvie knew that she had gone overboard after being scolded by her elder sister. She lowered her head and said, "I'm sorry, elder sister." "Sorry. Duque." Now that Queen Sylvanas had admitted defeat, Duque wasn't interested in scolding her anymore. Right, Duque, what about you? How far do you want to pursue power? Sasha came out of the blanket and asked with her head in her hand. If I can defeat the Burning Legion with my current strength, it doesn't matter if I don't strengthen myself. I don't actually pursue power. I just want to protect the people and things that I cherish. That's why I'm working so hard. Duque was telling the truth. Duque started to tell the three sisters about his journey in life. At first, he just didn't want to be turned into a ghoul. Because he was afraid, he cherished it. In order to protect everything he had, he worked hard. The more he had, the more he couldn't bear to part with it. Unknowingly, he did more and better. It sounded a little ridiculous, but it was actually very simple. This kind of thinking and practice that extended from the small self to the big self, and even the whole world, was much easier to accept than those exaggerated big principles and big hero ideas. As time passed, the three sisters were stunned to find that their man had become an existence that the mortals in the entire world of Azeroth had to look up to. Alright, I promise you, Duque, and I promise elder sister and third sister. After I destroy Nethario this time, I'll give birth to the child and be a good queen of Sin Dorii. I'll no longer pursue the power that might lead to my destruction. In fact, I don't see any chance of advancement. Perhaps the last sentence was the key to Queen Sylvanas' words. So what? This time, although the Alliance showed great power and suppressed 3 elemental realms in one go. This time, although the Alliance showed great power and pacified 3 elemental realms in one go, the 3 elemental realms weren't as powerful as before. In fact, the price paid by the Alliance was not small at all. At a high level, controlling the 3 major elemental realms was a huge gain. Duque expanded the weave and announced that even the mana consumption of frost elementals would be reduced by half permanently, which won the unanimous cheers and praise of the Pharaoh. For the middle and lower levels of the Alliance, the consumption was not small at all. The aftermath of the cataclysm had not subsided at all. That's right, the withdrawal of the rioting water, fire, and wind elemental creatures only prevented the disaster from further expanding. However, the damage caused by the previous earthquake had not been pacified. For example, the large-scale flood in the wetlands, the handling of the fissures in the Elven Forest, the Western Wilderness, Stranglethorn Vale, and other places, the expansion of the disaster had to be controlled first, then disaster relief, and then resumption of production and construction. Only when a new batch of food and products was produced could society be considered to be on the right track. Before that, to put it bluntly, they could only rely on the existing resources to survive. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 3 to 5 years to restore the productivity before the cataclysm. This was especially true for food. No matter how much food was stored before, without new rice and wheat harvests, the people would still be muttering in their hearts. However, no one could compare to Duque, who had a wild imagination. There were now many new members in the factory of Iron Stove Castle. A dwarven blacksmith said in the common language, "We need to quench this thing. We need to maintain that temperature for about 5 minutes. Before this piece of steel deforms and cracks, we need to cool it quickly in water, which is water quenching." Do you understand what I mean? A fire demon next to him understood and turned to a fire elemental with an inverted triangular body behind him. Then the fire elemental got to work. When the steel was heated and kept warm for a time, Naga, who was standing next to him, waved her hand. A water elemental came over and directly wrapped the piece of steel with its body. *Z, cooldown complete. Chapter 1848. At first, not just elemental creatures, even the dwarves couldn't adapt. This completely subverted their common sense of technology. Blast furnace? Boiler? No need. Water source? Cooling water? No need either. After mastering water, fire, and wind, the first invention Duque made was a brand new elemental industrial system. The furnace castle itself was a volcanic crater. The fire elementals used up the fire elementals just went into the lava and came back. The water elementals weren't afraid either. Outside of the furnace castle was a snowy mountain. The fire demons and Naga that Duque controlled became the most important bridge between mortals and elemental creatures. Wind elementals, also known as air elementals, also played an important role in the Alliance's industrial system. In the largest wind tunnel laboratory in the furnace castle, in the past, they relied on diesel engines to pull the propellers to provide the wind needed for experiments. Now, it was the air elementals that blew the wind. The experimenters could get as much wind as they wanted with just a word. The wind speed could be adjusted at will, even at different angles. In time, the Alliance's third-generation flying battleship would probably come out. It would be a hybrid flying battleship with a combination of traditional diesel propellers and wind elementals. Not only did it ensure safety, but it also took into account the new technology. The key was that it consumed less energy and had a better endurance. Not just industrial, but in agriculture, the addition of elemental creatures quickly subverted the image of elemental creatures in the eyes of civilians. The Alliance's propaganda was like this: in the past, the cruel elemental kings Ragnaros and Al-Akir controlled them to wreak havoc on the continent. Now that Duque became the king of water and fire elementals, the situation was reversed. In Loch Moden and the wetlands, this was originally the dwarves' largest food production base. Because of the collapse of the Boulder Dam, a large area of the wetlands was submerged, and Loch Moden began to lack water. Under normal circumstances, this year's food production in Loch Moden would be finished. But with water elementals, things were different. High-level water elemental elites were mobile medium-sized reservoirs. The dwarves commanded the Naga, and the Naga commanded the water elementals. Once they were controlled, not only did they open up a new water source in Loch Moden, in fact, the underground water that the dwarves didn't discover or couldn't handle before, they also rearranged the layout of the paddy fields in Loch Moden. In the wetlands, a group of muddy water elementals with sand and mud would run into a big puddle and squat. Water leads the way, sand and mud are left behind. It didn't matter how big the puddle was or whether there were dangerous creatures such as crocodiles in it. It turned into pieces of soft mud that were rich in water. At the very least, with a little tidying up, transporting some soil over, and then using a bulldozer to flatten it, it would immediately become a piece of fertile farmland. As long as Neltharion was settled and the Boulder Dam was rebuilt with cement, the wetlands would become a major grain-producing province in less than 2 years. It would be thousands of miles of fertile land that belonged to the dwarves. Not only the dwarves' territory, but the entire Alliance's territory, from the northernmost Sin-Dorii kingdom all the way to the south, to Lordaeron, Stromgard, Alterac, Gilnis, Dalagen, Stormwind, and finally Kurtiras, who had started building a new royal city in Stranglethorn Vale, were using the opportunity of the cataclysm to transform the landscape and carry out more scientific redevelopment of the land. Apart from the Night Elves who had always adhered to the doctrine of nature, all the races and kingdoms of the Alliance used this opportunity to reform themselves. At the throne meeting, someone asked, "Isn't there still Nesario who hasn't come out? What should we do if he attacks?" Duque said straightforwardly, "The reason why the cataclysm is called a cataclysm is that it was not something that could be done by Nesario or N'Zoth alone. This is a special effect produced by the combination of the 4 major elemental realms and Azeroth. Without the 4 major elemental realms working together to pull the elements of the world to resonate together, the destruction of the planet would have been impossible. What if Nesario attacks?" Muradin looked a little cautious. "Our hero squad and the Sleeping Dragon Temple will join forces to fight the attack immediately. Also, can a black dragon destroy nearly 10 million square miles of land at the same time?" As soon as Duque said this, everyone suddenly understood. Azeroth was very large. Duque had just said square miles, which was the way the Chinese were used to. The total territory of the Alliance was about 20 to 30 million square kilometers. This was not bragging. The Elven Forest alone was 1,300 kilometers from east to west, and the widest part was more than 400 kilometers, with a total area of 330,000 square kilometers. Plus the Reedridge Mountains, the Western Wilderness, the Twilight Forest, the Upwind Path, the Swamp of Sorrows, and half of Stranglethorn Vale. Today, Stormwind alone had more than 2 million square kilometers of territory. The specific figures could not be calculated because no detailed geological survey had been done. The 7 human kingdoms, the territory of the 3 hammer dwarves, Nomarigan, the night elves Danasuska and a small half of Kalimdor, the blood elves Sin Dorii, the Dreenei's blue mystic island, and the enclaves of Northrend. One had to know that apart from the Dragonbone Waste and the Northwind Taiga, Northrend was basically the territory of the Alliance. The ratio of square miles to square kilometers was 1:58. 20 million square kilometers might be considered small. It was a pity that the Alliance now only had a population of more than 10 million. Even if the ice fields, mountains, and wastelands were excluded, it was still a typical case of vast land but sparsely populated. The leaders of the Throne Conference could see that Duque was now a classic case of grasping the big and letting go of the small. As long as the overall situation was one, the losses of small places did not affect the overall situation. It could be foreseen that the places attacked by Nethario and his Twilight Dragons would definitely suffer losses. Under the surveillance of the magic net all over the world, once the densely populated areas of all the member states of the Alliance were attacked, they would definitely respond immediately. With Duque, a demigod of the magic net who was proficient in teleportation, it was completely possible to make the attackers suffer the consequences. Perhaps even their lives would be spared. Since the damage caused by the attack to the Alliance was limited, the Alliance could take advantage of the opportunity of the cataclysm forcing the residents to migrate and carry out a comprehensive development. As long as the population, productivity, and resource development went up, even if some people died, it would still be a big gain in the overall situation. Jaina smiled. I'm impressed. You can turn a world-destroying cataclysm into an opportunity to promote the development of the Alliance in one go. Is this the so-called elemental economy? Jaina did not know that the term she had casually mentioned had actually set off a craze among economists and historians about the topic of elemental creatures promoting the development of science and technology. While he shifted his attention back to the internal affairs, Duke did not forget about the ongoing war. Through the Eridar Gemini, Duque learned a new piece of information. What? You're saying that the Horde didn't run into the Twilight Dragons Varian, Cenarion, and Sinestra when they attacked Twilight Fortress? Chapter 1849. Recently, Gemini had been sent to the Horde by Duque. Duque subconsciously believed that the rest of the Twilight Hammer was already in Zotha's territory. If they were to enter a real cult with an evil god as a backdrop, Gemini would be defeated in no time. Duke didn't want Gemini to be secretly brainwashed or implanted with something unclean in her mind, only to end up harming himself. Therefore, Duque believed that this wasn't something Gemini should be involved in. Instead, the Horde was more suitable for Gemini. Gemini was indeed very successful. However, Brainless Roar didn't kill Variana, Serenaron, or Sinestra before taking over the Twilight Fortress. This news made Duque feel as disgusted as swallowing a fly. If Sinestra was there, even if the Horde could take over the Twilight Fortress, they would have to bleed to the last drop and use up all their strength. Unfortunately, Oni's mother wasn't there, which made Brainless Roar famous. That's right, Brainless Roar killed hundreds of thousands of Horde people and forced the other 4 races to leave. However, because he took over the Twilight Fortress and cut off the 2 heads of the traitor Gujar, he was still a great hero among the young orcs. So it's not time yet? Although Duque had messed with the goddess of fate countless times and was about to complete the great achievement of taming fate, fate would occasionally throw a tantrum at Duque, which made Duque feel like he couldn't completely understand it. Duque kept causing trouble, and fate's hand kept trying to fix the flow of fate. It felt like if he didn't intervene when the other party was about to die or when there was a big change in fate, it would be difficult to ruin the path of fate. Just like how Duque tried to kill Thrall when he was still a baby, but he didn't succeed. Master, do you want us to take advantage of the chaos in the Horde to control that Grim Totem, and have her assassinate Thrall? Queen Sailoras suggested with a charming smile. The air suddenly froze. A terrifying pressure, as if the entire world was pressing down on them, instantly froze Gemini's body. This wasn't a simple soul suppression, nor was it the purest double purgatory of ice and fire elements. Instead, it was the feeling that every magic circuit in his body was completely controlled by Duque, and every organ in his body was under his control. Salolas found that there was a strange change in her vision. The vision of her left and right eyes was not connected. She immediately understood that her eyeballs were being forced to look with her left eye and to look with her right eye. She noticed that her sister, Auras, was also in the same state. Duque was using such a terrifying and strange method to tell her that the Gemini twins were only his slaves. My puppet. Do whatever I tell you to do, but don't touch anything that you shouldn't do. We were wrong. Master, please spare my life. In the mouth that was still allowed to control itself, Gemini's lips spat out the same weak words. When she regained control of her body, Gemini was completely drenched, as if she had been fished out of the water. After telling Gemini to get out of here, Duque fell into deep thought. At this time, Duque received a soul message from his mount. Duque sent a telepathic message over. Onyxia, I have something for you to do. At this time, Alexstrasza was preparing to hold a dragon meeting in the Wormrus Temple. Although Duque, the mortals, and the guardian Hyjal formed by the god of the wilderness had joined forces to thwart the conspiracy of Lager and Al-Akir, the threat of the Twilight Hammer was still not eliminated. Therefore, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza decided to convene the Dragon Kings and the Backbone to hold a meeting to deal with the Twilight Hammer. Before the meeting, Alexstrasza and Krasis communicated in the Ruby Temple at the bottom of the Wormrus Temple, but the meeting ended on bad terms. The Queen said, the mortals have done too much to protect this world. After all, this cataclysm was caused by the traitor Nesario and En-Zoth. We, the Wormrus Temple, cannot remain silent. I want to gather all the dragons and attack the believers of the Twilight Hammer on a global scale. Krasis was stunned. All the dragons, including the black dragons and blue dragons? Of course, they are also an important part of the Wormrus Temple. I think the blue dragons have not recovered from the loss of Maligos, so we should not send them out so hastily. Moreover, among the black dragons, Onyxia is the only black dragon who is willing to obey the orders of the Wormrus Temple. We should get rid of them. Humph. Could it be that the bronze dragons and green dragons also have their own missions? In the end, just like the previous times, only the Red Dragon Legion will charge and break through the enemy lines? Cleostras, you are too selfless. Nesario is the common enemy of the 5-color dragons. I have decided to hold a meeting of the dragons as soon as possible. I will squeeze enough combat power from the various dragon kings. If this is the case, Your Majesty, please allow me to refuse to participate in the meeting. I don't think this is appropriate, and Duque has not sent us an application for joint operations. This means that he thinks that the alliance alone, with the power of the god of the wilderness at most, is enough to deal with the current situation. When it came to Duque, Alexstrasza was convinced, but she was also a little emotional. Pay attention. It is us 5-color dragons, not mortals, who have been entrusted with the duty of guarding this planet by the Titans. It is an unexpected surprise for mortals and native creatures to contribute to the protection of this world, not an obligation. The only ones who have the obligation to protect are us dragons and the various guardians. Proudly raising her chin, the Queen ordered, Cleostras, you don't have to go to the dragon meeting. You stay and protect the red dragon egg in the sanctum. Yes, Your Majesty. Krasis lowered his dragon head. Alexstrasza spread her huge dragon wings that seemed to be able to cover a small town, spread them high, and disappeared from Krasis' sight in a few moments. She went to the top of the Wormrus Temple that towered into the clouds. It was not a simple flight. The Wormrus Temple had various layers of subspace defense. In fact, she had just passed through several spaces. Krasis curled up his body and did not even enter a state of pretend sleep. He could not help but think of Duque's report. As an old ally of the Wormrus Temple, Duque had always been very outstanding. This time, it was also him who reported the matter of the Twilight Dragon in advance. The Twilight Dragon, this was a dragon egg that could contaminate a normal 5-color dragon, and then promote the transformation, so that a dragon that should have become a 5-color dragon could mutate into a twilight dragon. This news made the Wormrest Temple highly vigilant, so there was the initiative of Krasis, the big boss of the Red Dragon clan, to personally guard the dragon egg. Worried, Krasis ordered the Red Dragon with a double-headed sword not far away, bring 3 more teams of Dragonians and half-dragons here. Chapter 1850. The Dragonborn answered on the spot, yes. Very soon, the Red Jade Holy Temple became a place where there was a sentry every few steps. Krasis himself, 150 Dragonborn, and 200 half-Dragonborn were in charge. Even if they were attacked by thousands of Twilight disciples, he was confident that they could hold out until Alexstrasza returned. However, his confidence soon disappeared with the sound of the siren. Woo woo woo. It was the Titan's horn. That was the highest level siren. It meant that the invading enemy was strong enough to destroy the dragon's sleep sanctum. Krasis pointed with his right claw and immediately saw black spots like sesame seeds in the far north of the magic mirror's field of vision. Soon, the black spots rapidly grew larger. Not only their shape, but even their color could be seen clearly. The purple scales with a tinge of pink in them made Krasis's dragon eyes narrow abruptly. Twilight dragons. Not just 3 or 2, but thousands of them. Krasis' rich experience in aerial combat told him that almost every Twilight dragon here was equivalent to an adult chromatic dragon. If these Twilight dragons were only a threat to the dragon's slumber shrine, then the larger dragons leading them were the real killing machines. First of all, it occupied the center of the entire line of sight. No matter how you looked at it, it would always be the focus. That was Nethario, the Wing of Death. He had an abnormally huge body, with a wingspan of at least 300 meters. His small mountain-level body that swelled up like a balloon was now covered in a layer of terrifying acid as if water had been poured over it. The acid seemed to be controlled by some secret method as it lingered on his huge body. This was not to defend against the enemy's attacks, but to dissolve the dragon limbs that were constantly growing out of his body. Krasis saw with his own eyes in the magic mirror that a dragon's claw that was not inferior to his own suddenly grew out of a hole in Nethario's chest. Then, it twitched violently in the corrosive acid, becoming thinner, and finally, completely dissolved. Nethario alone was enough to give the dragon's sleep sanctum a headache. Krasis also saw Sinestra, an ancient female black dragon who used to be extremely powerful. Obviously, she was already dead and had become a death dragon that even the chromatic dragons hated. How ironic. He clearly hated Nethario to death, but after he died and resurrected Nethario, he immediately followed Nethario obediently. Apart from these 2 familiar dragons, there were other commander-level dragons, Variona and Serenarian. Krasis felt that he wouldn't be able to win against either of them. Only a true dragon aspect would be able to suppress them. The top-notch evil dragon Nethario, the second-level Sinestra, plus 2 Twilight dragons and thousands of Twilight dragons, this lineup was definitely luxurious. Roar. In the upper levels of the Sleeping Dragon Temple, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza's huge dragon shadow rose first, followed by the Emerald Dragon King Isra, the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu, and the new Magic King Kalegos. Following closely behind them were thousands of 4-colored giant dragons. Compared to the relatively simple purple light on the other side, the Dragon Slumber Shrine's light was much more colorful. Alexstrasza had originally asked Onyxia to recruit dark dragons as subordinates. However, after 10,000 years of depravity, most of the adult dark dragons had become dragon villains. They were very disgusted with Onyxia, the so-called princess who brought shame to the black dragons and ran off to be the demigod Duke's mount. There was no dark dragon bird at all. Onyxia wasn't keen on power or taking in subordinates. The strongest subordinates were a bunch of unpresentable young dragons, and then there were fledglings, dark dragons, and draconians. So in theory, there were only 4 of the 5-colored dragons left, and the main force of the army was here today. It was certain that Nesario had led the Twilight Dragon army with the mentality of fighting a decisive battle. What surprised Krasus was that the new Earth aspect dragon Onyxia, who was also present at the meeting today, didn't fight. He didn't know if it was because of the rumor that she was afraid of her parents. Krasus wanted to fight with the queen he admired, but he was more aware of his responsibility. He was guarding the future of the Red Dragon army. Just as Krasus was secretly raising his guard, there was suddenly a shrill scream around him. All of a sudden, every Red Dragon warrior in the entire Red Jade Temple entered a state of combat readiness. They clenched their halberds and swords in their hands. Krasus let out a loud roar, and a surging draconic aura immediately filled the Ruby Jade Temple. "Who? Come out!" As he roared, he turned his head and ordered a draconian, "Quickly inform His Majesty to send more reinforcements here." He was very smart. He knew that the other party had chosen to attack head-on even though they knew he was here. This meant that the other party had absolute confidence in attacking, and not relying on cannon fodder to destroy the dragon eggs here. Krasus didn't know that fate had already taken a major turn. He had no idea how the other party had passed through the realm net of temple guards all over the Dragonbone Waste. The next second, a large number of Twilight Hammer believers poured in. Some attacked the Draconians, while others began to cast evil magic on the dragon eggs scattered throughout the sanctuary. Krasus, of course, immediately attacked these invaders, but he couldn't use breath or magic, because spells with a wide attack range would destroy the dragon eggs. He could only use the most basic physical methods such as grabbing. He wasn't too worried about the situation in front of him, because in terms of combat power, the Red Dragon Guards had the absolute advantage. And as several adult red dragons that were patrolling nearby received the news and rushed over, the battle suddenly became one-sided. "It's safe." Just as Krasus had this thought, an adult red dragon in front of him was instantly torn apart. Scarlet blood spurted out of the dragon's head. Like a dying earthworm, it tumbled violently on the floor of the sanctuary before it hung down and stopped moving. "Who?" Krasus was shocked. He could clearly feel the powerful aura of the giant dragon outside the gate of the sanctuary. That was a terrifying aura that far surpassed that of the ancient dragon. Those who could have such power were all of the strongest in the dragon race. Usually, only the direct bloodline descendants of the Dragon King could have such strength. That kind of dark power was so dense that just feeling it made him shiver. For a second, Krasus almost thought that Onyxia had betrayed him, or that Nefarian had resurrected. Obviously not. A huge black dragon that he had never seen before stepped into the Red Dragon Holy Land. "Hello. Cleostras, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lazio." Chapter 1851. In the face of a black dragon that had the right to call itself a prince, Krasus felt a lot of pressure. At that moment, he did not notice that a chaotic historical event that should not have happened was happening, or rather, had already happened. In the original history, before the cataclysm, there was an Azeroth version of Orphan Zhao. The Red Dragons were actually a race that was equivalent to the Virgin Mary. Among them, there was a dragon named Riastasa who was looking for a pure black dragon egg that had not been invaded by evil. Because she was thinking, if she could somehow find a pure black dragon egg, then it could prove that the black dragons could still live freely in the world without being bewitched by the ancient gods. After all, the mission of the Red Dragons was to protect life. Getting rid of every black dragon in Azeroth was against their purpose. But if the Red Dragons could find a way to redeem the black dragons, then it meant that there was hope for them to continue living. The problem was that the wings of death had been corrupted by the ancient gods, and since the ancient war, he had been the enemy of his fellow dragons. The black dragons under his command had also become his minions. One after another, they had become a group of crazy, neurotic fallen black dragons. But would there be a dragon that could lay a pure dragon egg that was not affected by the ancient gods at all? And if it was not controlled by the wings of death and the evil power of the ancient gods, what would the future of this dragon be? So, the Virgin Mary Red Dragon Riastasa caught a female black dragon, Nishiandra, and forced her to study how to lay eggs. In the end, she laid an egg, and it was a very rare egg that belonged to the Wings of Death, Nesario. For this matter, be it the Wings of Death who was frantically searching for this egg or the red dragons, they were all caught up in this whirlpool. Moreover, this egg had its own will even before it was born. When the egg, although not yet out of the shell, developed to a maturity level where it could think independently and carry out plans, it sent out a cry for help to a group of sneaky fellows who were proficient in stealing and could even come and go freely under the eyes of the red dragons, the thieves of Ravenholt Manor. Thus, there was a strange case of the dragon egg disappearing. After many twists and turns in the plot, the black dragon Prince Razio was born. With the help of all kinds of resources, he quickly grew into a powerful dark dragon and called himself the last dark dragon. In theory, he was both good and evil in the original history, and had a good relationship with King Anduin Rin. However, at the time note of the King of Draenor, he participated as the mastermind in rescuing Braindead Roar and letting Braindead Roar go to another timeline to cause trouble. All in all, this was a powerful, intelligent, and sinister dragon prince. Unfortunately, fate had its way with dragons. In this life, with Onyxia's cleansing, the title of the last normal black dragon would not fall onto Lachio. More importantly, without the protection of the Red Dragon tribe, Lachio wouldn't have the luxury to wander around the Dragon Slumber Shrine, the Alliance, and other forces. So, Ratio, who was in front of Krasis, was obviously a henchman of the Wings of Death. No one knew that because of fate, Wing died prematurely. And the price of resurrection was the price of his own son smashing Nefarian. What was even more infuriating to Wing was that his disappointing traitorous woman had shamelessly knelt down and licked his great enemy, Duque, as a mount. So, after Nesario was resurrected by Enzos, he paid more attention to his children than ever before. So, in this life, there was no such thing as Nishiandra being forced to give birth to a pure dragon egg. Almost as soon as Wing regained his freedom, he found Nishiandra and directly left this female black dragon, who he had almost killed when he was having sex with her, with an evil child that truly belonged to him. Lachio, in this life, he was the successor of the new black dragon army, and appeared in the Dragon Slumber Shrine as a symbol of absolute evil. As soon as he attacked, he directly beheaded an adult red dragon. This destructive power was simply frightening. Krasis was ready to risk his life. Just then, another voice suddenly broke in. I didn't expect that damned father of mine would actually give me a younger brother. This is really making me worried. Should I kill my younger brother to prevent him from fighting with me for the position of Earth Guardian? Or should I persuade him to be like me, to become a mount in exchange for the world's forgiveness? A graceful woman wearing a black robe with golden edges leisurely walked into the Red Jade Shrine. The one who came in was naturally the Black Dragon Princess Onyxia in her human form. The Pentashade dragons each had their own holy lands in Nocent. Because it was an absolute protection zone for nurturing the next generation. Even if Onyxia was now a dragon aspect, it was an absolute taboo to enter the dragon egg hatching area of another dragon race without permission. But Krasis couldn't care less. Onyxia was obviously here to help. The Black Dragon Princess suddenly cast the ultimate transformation spell, and in less than a second, she turned into a black dragon that was a size larger than Lachio and confronted him. Clairstraz, hurry up and kill those Twilight spellcasters. They want to pollute the dragon eggs. If necessary, even the dragon eggs must be purified with dragon breath. After saying that, Onyxia flapped her wings and pounced towards her younger brother. It was not uncommon for a battle between two demigod colossal dragons to turn into an earth-shattering one another. It was Duque who ordered her to save the day. If the Red Dragon race's dragon eggs were all destroyed by the shockwaves of the battle, the Red Dragon race would eventually go berserk. It would be better if she didn't come at all. The Black Dragon took a deep breath as soon as she opened her mouth. Although she was in her human form, she could use her ultimate move earlier if she accumulated fire elements in advance. The conical dragon breath of nearly 60 degrees Celsius was too much for Lachio to handle. The magic resistance of the Pentashade dragons was quite high. Their tough dragon scales and dragon skin were born with high purity elements. It was not easy to injure a dragon with elemental attacks. Often, dragons had to rely on physical combat to decide the outcome of a battle. Onyxia's deep breath seemed to have broken this rule. Lazio jumped backward as if he was jumping. His wings flapped continuously, and he almost screamed as he dodged this deep breath. How can it be so hot? Onyxia grinned and revealed a mocking smile. Don't you know who my master is? Chapter 1852. Ordinary flames could hardly threaten a real WYRM, let alone a demigod WYRM. Onyxia only knew how to use fire. Originally, with her aptitude, using the deep breath to its limit was not a big deal. Dealing with elites was indeed impressive, but dealing with commander-level enemies was starting to feel like it wasn't enough. This was determined by the upper limit of her vitality. Ever since Dumok took control of the Land of Fire and became the master of the fire elemental world, everything had changed. Since he could generously transfer a portion of the elements to an outsider like Kale, he could not leave Onyxia behind. After all, she cooperated with him at all times. Whatever position he asked her to, the black dragon would do it. It wouldn't be a bad idea to occasionally have a more focused play. 5%. This was the amount of elements that Dumok gave his mount. As the Land of Fire further integrated into the world of Azeroth, it communicated and complemented the fire elements of the entire world. In fact, the absolute amount of elements that this element took up was increasing by the day. Having external assistance and relying solely on one's own physical strength were two completely different things. At that time, Lazio also urgently spat out dragon breath to resist deep breath. Firstly, it was rushed, and secondly, there was an absolute difference in quality and quantity. The fire elements that he spat out were actually caught in mid-air by the more mysterious, deep breath, and rolled back to burn Lazio's dragon body. Ah! Lazio screamed and retreated from the passage to the Red Jade Holy Temple. He had to retreat. Onyxia, who was even larger in size, had already pounced forward. The Red Jade Holy Temple was located below the Dragon's Sleep Temple. Although the space was not small even by the standards of a dragon, it was not suitable for a battle. For a dragon, most of the time, strength, agility, and vitality were directly proportional to its size. The larger the dragon, the stronger its overall attributes. In the limited space of the Red Jade Holy Temple, it could be forced to the point where there was nowhere to hide. It would become the most primitive wrestling. Looking at its size, Lazio knew that he was going to lose. He could only retreat out of the Red Jade Holy Temple and fight for space. Onyxia pounced after him. Lazio glanced at the battle in the sky north of the Dragonbone Waste and fled north without looking back. His father and mother were there, and according to the intelligence, they were the nemesis of his good sister. Although it was embarrassing, the Dark Dragon race was mostly people with no moral integrity. Losing face was better than losing one's life. Lazio flew north without looking back. Right at this moment, he suddenly felt his massive dragon body stagnate. It was the illusion of suddenly falling into a pool of paste. Impossible! Lazio exclaimed. What he said was impossible. He subconsciously believed that there was no existence that could use simple magic to imprison a demigod black dragon. That's not something a mortal can do. It wasn't something that a female black dragon like Onyxia who only knew how to play with fire would do. In his astonishment, Lazio twisted his snake-like neck and looked behind him. He saw something that made his soul jump out of his body. On Onyxia's dragon claws, there was a huge ring-like object. This should be some kind of magic tool. Lazio watched as his sister activated one of them, and then his body, which had just regained some mobility, immediately became sluggish again. Demigod tool? Normally, no demigod would inject a large amount of divine power to create a single-use magic tool. After all, it was quite exhausting and not beneficial. Coincidentally, there was a demigod who did this, and this demigod was undoubtedly Duque. He had engraved the Titan runes on the huge mithril ring so that he could instantly use the Titan's power to activate deceleration. That was equivalent to him casting a demigod spell himself. Even with the demigod dragon's magic resistance, there would be a moment of numbness. This was simply a waste, but in a battle between demigod dragons, this was undoubtedly the key factor that would tip the scales of victory. The massive black dragon princess seized the opportunity and pounced forward. She swept her dragon tail from a high angle and hit her brother's waist heavily. Every dragon's tail was different. Her dragon tail was just like a standard meteor hammer. Not to mention that the end was huge and oval, and there were a few extremely hard and thick spikes. Lacio immediately let out a wail. Not only was his left rib pierced, but he was also pulled by the force of the attack, leaving several deep wounds that exposed his bones. The violent blow caused him to fall from midair. He crashed into the snowy field full of dragon bones. His colossal body smashed through several dragon skeletons in an instant. It was as if his actions had disturbed the souls of the sleeping dragons, and the dragonbone wilderness seemed to make a dissatisfied grunt at that moment. Sorry. My stupid brother. Since I'm here, I won't let you go to the north. In midair, Onyxia, who was flapping her huge wings, stared coldly at her blood relatives. Other families would at most fight. The Black Dragon family was simply asking for death. Lacio knew that he had failed, not only in terms of strategy, but also in terms of combat power and combat experience. He was inferior to his sister in terms of elements. What was worse was that because of his age and lack of combat experience, he could not unleash his tyrannical physical fitness. It couldn't be helped. He was controlled by his father, Miserio, as soon as he was born. His father was not a benevolent father. He would slowly feed him moves and teach him how to fight. His father was an empty fish, and he directly ordered him to pollute the dragon eggs of the Red Jade Holy Temple and the other temples. If he did not do well, he would be killed. Originally, Krasis would be a good opponent and a good whetstone. Using the difference in rank, Lacio could hone his skills in actual combat, and while he was entangled with Krasis, the idiotic Twilight believers below could complete the task given by his father. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. But why did an enhanced version of his sister suddenly appear? This was clearly not giving him a way out. Completely afraid to approach his sister, Lacio struggled on the ground, turned around, and flew east. He did not realize that it was Onyxia who was hovering in the air just now, forcing him to fly to the east. He. My stupid brother. I wish I could say goodbye to you forever today. Onyxia glanced at the fierce battle in the northern sky, and then flew after Lacio. Lacio flapped his wings, and the more he flew, the more he felt that something was wrong. He used all his strength to fly, but he felt that his sister's Onyxia's speed should not be that low. Just as he flew over the Dragon's Pine River on the east side of the Dragonbone Waste, a large cluster of dense lights suddenly approached at high speed. Boom! Lacio was hit by hundreds of cannonballs. Accompanied by the Black Dragon Prince's painful cry, he fell again and slammed into the ice of the Dragon's Pine River, breaking the ice by the river. He fell into the water. Chapter 1853. Trap. Everything was a trap. When Lacio's huge body fell into the water, he was stunned by the scene in front of him. Next to him, there was a huge water giant sitting in the river, hugging its legs. The river was not shallow, but compared to this underwater giant, it was like a small ditch. What made Lacio's heart palpitate was the strong waves of water elemental energy emitted from the giant. It was definitely not a small sea giant. That was, a dumb giant dragon actually fell into the river. Normally, it was very difficult to transmit sound underwater. However, this giant's voice directly entered Lacio's mind. Lacio almost peed his pants. He knew who this water giant with a strange golden chain on his chest was. It was the former lord of the water elemental realm, Neptulon. Lacio felt like he was being attacked by a dog. You're the former lord of the water elemental realm. What are you doing in this river? Neptulin grinned and rose to his feet. As he stood up, the water level of Dragon's Pine River, which had not changed for thousands of years, suddenly rose by 100 meters in 10 seconds. This was a very exaggerated number. Under normal circumstances, the banks on both sides of the river would definitely suffer. However, the water level only rose to the width of the river. The banks did not move at all. Neptulin was obviously trying to trap him. No. Wah. Lassio choked on a mouthful of water. At this moment, how could he not know that his opponent was here to kill him? He struggled to leave this strange water body. Unfortunately, he only managed to struggle for 3 seconds before several white lines of water closed in on him from afar. One of them was a petite female Naga, only slightly larger than a human. She was dressed in luxurious accessories, and judging from the golden crown on her head, she was at least a queen. The other one was a huge water elemental, and the last one was a huge and ugly strange fish. Neptulin, good job. This time, you've done a good job. The female Naga spoke with the voice of her soul. Neptulin's face showed a look of joy. It did not matter if it was fake or not. The Naga queen turned her head. Oh. It was actually the legendary Prince Ratio. What an honor to meet you. I am Queen Naga, the demigod of Lake Azeroth, Lord Emir, the queen regent of the tidal throne, Vashj. This is the first time we meet, and I believe it will also be the last time. With that, she raised her hand. Neptulin, Unstable Hydus, and Yusler, the 3 super thugs, grinned hideously as they pounced on Lachio. In the northern sky, an incomparably tragic internal war of the dragon clan was going on. As far as the eye could see, there were gorgeous and dazzling dragon breaths and flashing magic spells everywhere, and the air was filled with entangled battles. Whether it was the wyvern guardian of the dragon's slumber shrine or the twilight wyvern belonging to Nesario, they were all bloodthirsty, and used the fiercest means to deal with these enemies who were theoretically their compatriots. Perhaps the moment they met, a large cloud of murky and stinky blood rain would fall from the sky, or even scattered pieces of internal organs. With a flash, the dragon claw slashed down, and perhaps an entire row of ribs was neatly severed. In terms of combat experience, the 4-color dragon warriors were obviously superior to the twilight wyvern. The aerial combat experience accumulated over the years was not something that the twilight wyvern, who grew up on stimulants and pills, could compare to. In the initial battle, the 4-color dragon and the twilight wyvern had a shocking battle loss ratio of 1:10. However, the Dragon's Slumber Coalition army immediately discovered that something was wrong. The strength and physical fitness of the twilight wyvern were comparable to that of the 4-color dragon. Their special ability was to create a unique twilight domain space, and use this space to crazily absorb energy from the outside world to promote their own growth. As long as there was enough energy for them to absorb, they could grow rapidly. It only took a few months or even a few weeks for a twilight wyvern to hatch to adulthood, but it took hundreds or thousands of years for an ordinary dragon to hatch to adulthood. The terror of having Nesario in charge was reflected at this time. This was a terrifying characteristic that did not exist in the original history. Enzos had bestowed a terrifying halo effect on the wings of death. This terrifying halo, which covered an area of more than 10 kilometers, greatly strengthened the twilight domain of each twilight wyvern. Not only was the domain larger, but the effect was also more amazing. As long as any energy transfer occurred in the twilight domain, the energy would be absorbed. Whether it was the aftermath of magic that was cast, or the flesh and blood that fell from mid-air and passed through this space. Whether it was the 4-color dragons or the twilight wyverns, as long as it was energy, it would be absorbed without any resistance. Many of the dragons found that their opponents suddenly swelled up as if they were inflated, and then their speed, agility, and vitality skyrocketed as if they had been injected with chicken blood. At first, the twilight wyverns did not have any brains and only knew how to fight by instinct. However, after a few rounds, as long as they did not die, they could use the energy absorbed from their surroundings to repair their bodies, and learn new tricks from their opponents to deal with the 4-color dragon. Soon, the battle-loss ratio between the two sides changed dramatically. From the initial 1-10, it became 1-3. Sister. The sleeping dragon temple is finished. Isra shouted. Alexstrasza, of course, knew that it would not work, but she really could not spare her hands. King against king, general against general, soldier against soldier. Just Nesario, who was as huge as a mountain, was enough for the few dragon aspects to suffer. Not to mention the addition of Sinestra, and the two twilight wyverns, Varion and Serenarian, who were quite capable of fighting. Varion and Serenarian were not as strong as the dragon aspects, but they could steadily suppress the ancient wyvern of the four-color dragon. After a few rounds, 3 ancient wyverns had been seriously injured and forced to retreat. In fact, if it were not for Nesario frantically chasing after his 3 former siblings, the sleeping dragon coalition army would have suffered even more losses. At this time, a black dragon's shadow suddenly entered the field of vision of the two sides. Your Majesty Alexstrasza, the Ruby Jade Temple was ambushed by the black dragon Prince Ratio, but I took care of him. Now it is basically safe. The first half of Onyxia's words made the Red Dragon Queen's heart jump to her throat, but the second half made her feel for the first time that this junior was quite useful. The black dragon turned her head and taunted the 2 twilight wyverns who were obviously several sizes larger. Humph. Varion and Serenarian, right? Poor guys. He didn't know anything and was used as a weapon. Do you think you are very strong? Let me tell you, I can fight 10 of you guys. It was a clumsy provocation, but for the relatively simple twilight wyverns, it was good enough as long as it worked. In an instant, Onyxia had pulled away 2 of the enemy's main forces. Before leaving, she also sent a message to the Red Dragon Queen. Duque requests to join the battle. Chapter 1854. Duque? Alexstrasza really had a love-hate relationship with Duque. Once upon a time, Duque was just such a small and weak human. At that time, she hung out with Duque purely because she felt that this human was interesting. It was easy to get tired of living after living for too long. This was not a derogatory term, but a literal one. If it was not for the power and responsibility given to her by the Titans, she really did not know how she had lived for the past 25,000 years. Perhaps she would have developed strange interests like some blue dragons. For example, falling in love with a well, or falling in love with the fairy sister, soul healer, in the graveyard. After seeing all kinds of situations in the mortal world, her dragon life only had a few interests left: curiosity and excitement. Of course, she would not put herself in danger just to experience the feeling of heartbeat just for the sake of pure excitement. Because of the novelty and excitement, it was more like a hobby outside of fulfilling her duty as a guardian. That was why she did not hesitate to help Duque. Perhaps it was to repay a debt of gratitude, or perhaps it was purely to see how far this little human who always surprised her could go. She did not expect that in a mere 20 years, not even 1,000th of her life as a dragon guardian, Duke Marcus, a human with meager strength at the beginning, had grown to a level comparable to her. Alexstrasza was a little conflicted. She was happy that Duque was strong. He was too strong. She was conflicted. She always felt that she had lived for 25,000 years in vain. Why could it not compare to what Duque had achieved in 1,000th of her time? Living for too long, living for too long. Dragon hearts would become a little conflicted. Mortals clearly looked very simple, so why did a monstrous peerless powerhouse like Duque appear? Not only was he strong, but he could also stir up the general trend of the entire world. Even she felt that all the dragon guardians and guardians were led by the nose by him. However, every single one of them was willing to do so because his actions were righteous and in line with the way of the heavens and the way of the Titans. Sometimes, when Alexstrasza looked at Onyxia, who had a terrible reputation and was cunning, and saw her intelligence plummet after being subdued by Duque, she would see a rare joy on Onyxia's face that was almost impossible for dragons to have. She couldn't help but put herself in Onyxia's shoes. If he became Duque's mount like Onyxia, would he? Every time she thought of this, the queen would feel like her heart was in a mess. This was practically a blasphemy against the duties of a titan. She found it difficult to describe the complex feelings in her heart, but she forcefully pushed them out of her mind. Time returned to the present. For a moment, she was distracted, and she was almost hit by Nesario's huge claws. Fortunately, although Nesario's body size had increased, his speed and agility seemed to have decreased significantly, which gave her a chance to save him. She screamed in her heart, "I can't hesitate anymore. I am the leader of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. All the dragons are waiting for my command. A leader must never hesitate." As far as the eye could see, countless dragons were fighting in the sky. She already knew how terrifying the twilight dragons were. 10,000 years ago, Nesario had betrayed the Pentashade dragons, and the dragons that had once blotted out the sky had withered because of that battle. It took the four-colored dragons 10,000 years to barely restore their numbers to a less miserable state. If she cared about her pride and hoped to use the power of the Dragon Slumber Shrine to deal with the resurrected traitor, Nesario, she was afraid that the Dragon Slumber Shrine would suffer more damage than the last time. The enemy in front of her was strong, and she was weak. Even if she won, it would only be a Pyrrhic victory. What about the void battlefield in the future? Alexstrasza gritted her dragon teeth and spread her divine thoughts. "Duque. I know you're here. Come and help. I know what you're thinking. The Dragon Slumber Shrine will be the most loyal ally of the Alliance in the future." Her spiritual call instantly received a reply. "Yo. I wanted to make a move a long time ago, but I was afraid of interfering with the internal affairs of the Dragon Slumber Shrine." Pfft. You make it sound like you didn't have a part in the first siege against Nesario. The man and the dragon teased each other. Everyone knew that the little knot in their hearts had disappeared without a trace. Originally, the Dragon Slumber Coalition army did not know how the Alliance would make a move, but they soon found out. Woo woo woo. It was a strange sound coming from the east of the Dragonbone Wilderness. Many twilight dragons turned their heads to look to the east in a daze, but the four-colored dragons came to their senses and squatted down with their hands on their heads. Oh, no, it was a gesture of self-defense. Countless artillery shells gathered into a torrential rain of artillery shells that were denser than locusts. They crossed a distance of 10,000 meters and blasted toward the area where the dragons were fighting fiercely in midair. At a glance, the Alliance's artillery was simply a trap for its allies. This was an indiscriminate attack. In midair, the four-colored dragons and the twilight dragons were all wrestling with each other, and there was no obvious formation to distinguish. At most, it was a cooperation between a few dragons in twos and threes. It was not a positional battle like in a traditional war. But the moment the artillery shells exploded, the essence of Duque's bombardment could be seen. All the artillery shells were the classic, Type 3 bullets. This kind of shotgun shot out from a standard barrel would explode when it flew into the air of the battle, forming a large number of fragments. For enemies with relatively weak bodies, this was a fatal metal storm. Even if it was a griffin, its skin would be lacerated and its wings would be crippled in this kind of storm. For a giant dragon that was covered in dragon scales and dragon skin that could be said to have thick skin and flesh, and even the dragon's eyes had a layer of extremely hard cornea, the lethality of the shrapnel was almost zero. More importantly, these artillery shells were all specially made for the holy light. The Twilight Dragon's Twilight Domain was derived from the classic power of corruption. It was a perfect counter to the holy light. This meant that the four-colored dragons were completely fine, while the Twilight Dragons cried out in pain as if they had been splashed with acid. It was like a cooperative game. As long as the option, friendly damage, was not ticked, you could casually stab your teammates and be fine. It seemed very unscientific, but it happened just like that. This is amazing. Isra could not help but exclaim. What did the Twilight Dragons rely on to become stronger and stronger? Wasn't it that disgusting Twilight Domain? Once the Twilight Domain was suppressed, the four-colored dragons began to gain the upper hand again. In the sky above the Dragon's Pine River in the east, a huge fleet was circling the flying fortress Naxxramas. In fact, at the moment, less than half of the fleet fired their cannons. Naxxramas's secondary cannons were firing. In the command room, Tyron's beautiful eyes darted around. "Duque, did you expect that Lesio would attack the Red Jade Holy Temple?" Beside her, Duque shrugged. "How could that be? I only expected that Nescio would choose to attack the dragon eggs of the four-colored dragons." Chapter 1855. To be honest, he really did not think that sending Oni would actually catch Lachio. In fact, he did not even know if Lachio still existed in this world. Unfortunately, Tyron pouted and crossed her arms, looking as if she did not believe him. Duque almost choked to death. "Damn. Is this considered pretending to be the god of prophecy too much that people don't believe me even if I fail?" At this time, Vasht's magic message came. "That new black dragon Prince Lachio is almost done. What should we do?" In the magic mirror, Vasht's red hair floated in the water, giving off a different kind of sexiness. Duque was not in the mood to appreciate it. He rubbed his chin, weighing the impact of Lachio's life and death. No matter how he thought about it, Lachio did not seem to have done anything good, nor did he really affect the general trend of history. To put it bluntly, he was the kind of guy who was an eyesore, but it did not seem to be a problem to kill him. Duque hesitated for 3 seconds, then made a throat-cutting salute. "Remember to annihilate his soul." In the scene, the Black Dragon Prince, who was supposed to be a part of history, was dancing in the water. He was dragged deeper and deeper into the water by Neptulon, who was a rough man underwater. He was tossed and turned by the waves, and he sank deeper and deeper into the water. Lachio was chased all the way from Dragon's Pine River to the sea by a group of ferocious underwater bosses, through the east side of the ancient beach, and all the way to the deepest trench. A dragon soaring in the sky falling into the water was a huge mistake in itself. Now, Lachio had to pay the price in advance for his undisplayed ambition and possible mistakes. Perhaps this was unfair to a formidable dragon, but since he had chosen Nesario's side, then he was sorry. Hydas, Tidewalker, Yusler, and Neptulon swarmed forward. They continuously used various water attacks to create wounds on Lachio's body, weakening his vitality. When his speed and strength dropped drastically, Marogri the Tidewalker threw a huge anchor into his waist. Then, Neptulon threw a thick black chain and strangled his neck. Then, Hydas covered his limbs with high-purity water elemental energy. Finally, Yusler pounced on him and bit his neck. "Spare me." That was Lacio's last plea. It was too late. Pfft. The dignified Black Dragon Prince died sullenly in the deep sea. Vasht quietly sat in the shallow waters, casting spells as she gazed at the offering in the sea. She was suppressing and erasing Lachio's soul. On the east side of Dragon's Pine River, a neat array of cannons kept firing. The artillery finally angered Nesario, who ordered the Twilight Dragons to attack the Alliance's air force. Under his command, Valriona and Thanarion, who were being kited by Onyxia, turned around and flew east towards the Alliance's air force. An ear-piercing alarm sounded in Naxxramas almost instantly. Unlike the previous Level 2 alarm, it was preparation for an attack. This was the alarm for an enemy attack. The Alliance soldiers in the intelligence room of the stronghold observed the incoming enemy through the mage's eyes in Dragonbone Waste, as well as the stronghold's own enemy tracking system and binoculars. They stared dumbfoundedly at the dragons in the sky. The Alliance had experienced many battles since its establishment. Since Naxxramas fell into the hands of the Alliance, it had also experienced several battles, but it had never tried to fight such a large group of dragons. The last time it faced a large-scale attack was in Northrend, against the gargoyles of the Lich King Arthas. The purple-red twilight dragons approached quickly. They spread their wings and rode the wind, sweeping over from the battlefield 10 kilometers away. 10 kilometers, which was 10,000 meters, sounded very far. For these flying behemoths, it would only take a few minutes. They're really fast. Bulang Bronzebeard stared at this scene on the monitor and couldn't help but curl his lips. Boys, use the armor-piercing bullets. Grenades are useless against these big guys. The 3 holy light projectiles had been proven to only be used for harassment, not to kill them. Bulang shouted, old-style main cannons. Fire in unison. Cannonballs triggered by TNT explosives were continuously fired from the muzzles of the stronghold. Even though the new cannons were all equipped with brakes to reduce the reaction force, they didn't dare to fire in a real sense. The continuous impact still caused the entire stronghold to move nearly 10 meters to the east. Under the surveillance cameras controlled by the observers, Bulang clearly saw that the old-style cannonballs, even after being treated with holy light, still couldn't penetrate the tough skin and scales of the twilight dragons. Although some of the twilight dragons' wings were damaged, they only slowed down. Anyway, after a round of cannonballs that seemed to shake the earth, not a single twilight dragon fell in midair. The human gunners could almost see the contempt at the corners of the twilight dragons' mouths. Taking advantage of the intermission of the human cannons, these dragon-shaped monsters created with evil secret methods quickly closed the distance between them and the flying stronghold. Many of the Alliance soldiers' hearts were about to jump out of their chests at this moment. If the Alliance's cannons couldn't cause effective damage to the enemy, it meant that this was likely to turn into a massacre of the Alliance's air force. At this time, Duque's leisurely voice sounded. Bulang, relax. Don't we still have Mimran? Yes. According to my calculations, the new cannonballs can definitely penetrate those purple lizards flying in the sky. Mimran, who looked like a mechanical gnome, had 2 light bulb eyes that kept flashing. That's right, Duque was F*King crazy about the Alliance's technology tree again. The biggest feature of transmigrators adding talent points was that they wouldn't add the wrong talent points. In fact, 1 kilometer behind the group of twilight dragons, Isra was leading a large group of green dragons to help the Alliance. Sister, I don't think we need to help Duque's side. Whether we need to or not is one thing, whether we go or not is another. Go quickly, don't be in a straight line with the twilight dragons and the Alliance's cannons. Follow them from the side and back. If necessary, help at any time, Alexstrasza instructed. The main force of the twilight dragons had turned east, which meant that the pressure on the 4-color dragons was greatly reduced. In theory, concentrating all the dragons to besiege Nesario was the right way to go, but she couldn't let such a large group of twilight dragons run around. In fact, except for Isra, who was particularly confident in Duque, many green dragons didn't think that mere mortals could block thousands of twilight dragons with their flying creations alone. In their eyes, the thin 3-dimensional defense line of the Alliance's flying fleet was no match for the locust-like twilight dragons, be it in terms of strength or visual effects. In particular, when the Alliance's first round of main cannons fired did not even bring down a single twilight dragon, most of the green dragons in the Green Dragon Army confirmed their thoughts. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.